Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream as always. Hope you're doing well. So on last night's stream we watched the first video with the Discerning Tarnished, Why Did Radahn Accept to be Miquella's Consort? Then we followed that up with ZD Boys, How Artorias of the Abyss Cemented Dark Souls' Legacy. Then the Erdtree and the Werewood, Elden Ring and Aswayath Parallels. And finished off with 5 soul lore mysteries that were never solved by Silvermont. So today, especially if you're on the Discord, you may have gotten a bit of a hint that we're going to watch a couple videos by Quaylog, because I titled my going live thing, These Streams Keep Me Up at Night, because half of her videos are always X keeps me up at night, and I'm not talking about Twitter. So anyway, hold on, let me... All right. So... first up for tonight's schedule, we have the Shadowlands Keep Me Up at Night by Quaylog. Then, in all quotes, These Elden Ring Ruins Keep Me Up at Night. Another one by Quaylog. Then, following that up, we have Theological Themes and Narrative Archetypes in Elden Ring, an analysis by Credence Questions. Which, I don't know. It's a lot to... It could either go extremely well or extremely bad, and... I'm always a little bit hesitant to see what we'll get with stuff like that. And then following that up, Elden Ring Lore IMPS by Square Table Gaming, if we still have time. So I tend to not really pause as much for Quaylog's videos because they're all pretty well sourced and she uses her language well enough that she makes it clear when she's speculating, and I've always appreciated that. So we might get to this one after all. So anyway... everybody, welcome on back to the stream. So, Stoatboat, Clown Scum, Boris, Arcrusader, Elden Enthusiast, Phantom Leaves, Daves, and Astenex. Sorry if you guys can hear the dog. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive on into that first video with The Shadowlands Keeps Me Up at Night by Quaylog. And good luck with Bloodborne, Elden. Is that your first time playing it, or no?
gotten a lot of questions from people asking me to cover NPC and demigod lore first. Some of the questions include, why did Miquella and Melania march on Radon when Radon seemed to have a vow with Miquella? And things like, did he have to die? Did Melania weaken him for us? What's going on with that? And a lot of the intentions regarding some of the demigods and NPCs I actually can't get into until we understand the rules of the Realm of Shadow, because I think that dictates a lot of the choices that the demigods are making. They're trying to kind of play the hand that they've been dealt with the rules that they have. So let's get into those rules. That's what today's episode's about. It's going to be the rules of the Realm of Shadow. We know that at some point in the story's history, Queen Marika decides to usher in her Age of Gold and seals away the Realm of Shadow. We'll get into why in another video, but the point of me bringing this up is that this causes a division of a once singular realm into two different planes. We also learn from NPC Enya in the base game that she also sealed away the Rune of Destined Death, or the Forbidden Shadow, which I think plays into this a little bit. There's been this separation between life and death. We get a hint that during the story trailer with the line, an affair from which gold arose, and so...
What the hell? This video's got actual editing for Quelaag? It's kind of a little bit shocking that it's not just a Miro board. Anyway, that's not so important. Give the dog love. Now he's all confused because I pet him.
Who was Shadowborn that this is the case, but it's also further confirmed with the Suppressing Pillar lore, which declares that this is the very center of the Lands Between. So even though the Realm of Shadow is separate...
Wait, what is that sword? I don't recognize it. Looks very interesting. Is this new?
It is very clearly a plane that used to belong in the Lands Between. So how did Marika achieve this? Obviously, she was like, at the Elden Ring, we've talked about this before, is like the source code of reality in this setting, and she's like kind of gone about separating it and, you know, messing with reality a little bit. But I also think that there's some really cool lore regarding her background as a seamstress and Radagon's background as a seamster. We know that Radagon, Marika's other self, is proficient at sewing cloth.
Oh, that's the Dragon Man katana? Or Dragon Hunter. So is that the one with the special art that's really good against Bale?
That has magical and mystical properties.
Or is it the other one?
And this is supported by items that we've talked about a long time ago in the past. Marika has the Mimic's Veil, a veil that casts an illusion that allows the wearer to appear as something else. That is known as Marika's Mischief, and therefore associated with her, we have the Concealing Veil, which was a veil used by the Eternal Cities and the Black Knife Assassins, who are Marika's kin, which allow users to disappear when at a distance. We have the veil on the Black Knife Assassin armor, which obfuscates their face, the Golden Sewing Needle that used to belong to Radagon, which we can give to Bach to alter demigod armor, and the
You know, I just now noticed the Erdtree depiction at the top of the needle. Anyway.
Baldachin that's located in Queen Marika's bedchamber, which resembles the baldachin that is concealing the Shadowlands, or the Realm of Shadow. So this other place that used to belong to the Lands Between then has become a dumping ground for death and other things that Queen Marika wishes to suppress. Enter Helfen Steeple. This is an item that I didn't think was going to come up at all. I assumed that the Helfen...
Ooh, I'm surprised. I kind of thought / hoped we might get something with the Helfen, especially once we heard more about the Shadow Tree. But how messed up is it that we hear about a Spiral Tree, a Shadow Tree, and neither seem directly related to the Helfen, depending on whether or not one believes that the Helfen is a candle tree or perhaps like spiraled at its base. And also, Corn, I forgot to say hello to you, but welcome back in.
Helfen and the Lampwood were just kind of like some weird myth or a belief system that popped up, like a folktale almost, because Miyazaki loves to do that a little bit. Like he'll add some flavor text or regional lore about a land in a distant place. I thought that Helfen Steeple was kind of like this. It was like maybe a belief from like a particular group, like the Caden Riders or something, regarding the afterlife. But I didn't realize that we were actually going to potentially go there in...
And I kind of took the Helfen Steeple to be one of those references to something like the Morion Blade of Dark Souls 3 or whatever it was called in Demon Souls. Is it still Morion Blade then? I think it might have been a little bit different, but it's just like one of the recurring weapons that they use in many of their games.
The DLC, so let's break that down a little bit. The greatsword is patterned after the black steeple of the Helfin, the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world. The lamplight is similar to grace in appearance, and it is said that it can only be seen by those who meet their death in battle. While in the church district of the Shaded Keep, I realized that the spires resembled the Helfin steeple a little bit, which acts as this game's Valhalla. There's also a cute little nod to Valhalla with Freya, as she can be found in a field starting the DLC, and in Nordic mythology, Valhalla belongs to Odin, but Folkvang belongs to Freya, which is like this big field of reeds, which is also an afterlife. Super cool imagery that's being used here, but I digress. I was having a conversation with another content creator, Manus Celeste, who is a Twitter content creator. They do a lot of like Elden Ring lore posts, and we were talking about the Helfin steeple and the way that death is being processed and suppressed in the Shadow Realm, and another user, Dry Cola, responded with something else that they noticed. The boats around the Shaded Keep are the Tibia Mariner boats. They're the Gravekeeper boats, and they're being used to burn dead bodies to ash in the realm.
Okay, now is probably as good a time as ever. Okay, yeah, I guess it really is the Tibia Mariner boat. I've just kept forgetting to actually look at it.
And they're being used to burn dead bodies to ash in the Realm of Shadow, which replaces the original process of death. Originally, when everything used to be one, the process of death was dictated by the Deathrite birds, and they would burn both the body and the soul of those in their kilns to create like a ash. In addition to this, we also get Helfin steeple from a Tibia Mariner.
I have a boat.
So there's this connection between the Shadow Keep and the Tibia Mariners and the way that death is now being processed, which is super cool. But these little references to Valhalla was kind of like clicking into place with me. You know, Kara's grave, that's in kind of like the southern part of the map. First off, that name is suspiciously close to Charon from Greek mythology. Charon carries the souls of those who have been given funeral rites across rivers that separate the worlds of the living and the dead. So we're having like an entity that's able to traverse both planes and carry souls from one place to another, which is a really cool enemy design given the fact that they act as necromancers in the lands between, and they're able to reanimate the dead utilizing either deathroot or like their songs. But another really cool visual motif that's being used here is the red spider lilies that cover Karo's grave. And in both China and Japan, the red spider lilies are believed to guide the dead spirits into the next life during a reincarnation cycle. And sure enough, we seem to see the ghostly manifestation of the grave violet item in the Shadow Realm to help guide us into the lands between, potentially. So we're kind of seeing like there is a veil and there's two sides of the veil. And so we're seeing, when we're in the Realm of Shadow, we're kind of seeing what ghosts see when they see the grave violets, because the Tibia Mariners use grave violets for necromancy. So we're kind of like, if we were a lost spirit, we would follow those flowers into the lands between via spirit summoning. Another really weird item that also kind of establishes that there's this veil between the spirit realm and the realm of the living is the fact that the Mimic Tier larva item exists as like a spirit in the Shadow Realm, because it's established that it's not quite corporeal and not quite a spirit.
And the existence of this unique larval tier is, I don't want to say like baffling or anything like that, but I just did not expect anything quite like this. And that does make me wonder what the difference between the two forms of the larval tiers are. This one seems to be more incorporeal and removed from like silver and whatnot, but the fact that it says that it's not spirit is interesting. Actually, let me double check that. I don't remember if I have. Where's my mouse? All right. Larval tier. Oh, I see. I'm just a little bit silly sometimes. So, with the way that it says neither flesh nor spirit, I kind of like checked out mentally. It says it's something in between, which kind of means it's both, but neither flesh nor spirit fully. So this is not an exclusionary neither, if that makes sense. So it's in between flesh and spirit, which I don't know if that's that's better or worse. And everybody else, welcome on in. Joji Poji, Cohiba, and Jack Irish. Nice to see you guys again.
On both sides, so we're seeing that it has this like weird in-between property. So that's a really cool like little artistic detail that even though it's the same item, it's visually distinct when you're seeing it from the realm of shadow. What I'm trying to get at here, though, is that for all intents and purposes, this realm has been repurposed into an afterlife, and it's referencing various instances of the afterlife in real-world mythology. This is also likely the reason why Radon had to die in order for his vow to be fulfilled to Mikola. He needed Radon's soul to be moved into the realm of shadow because that is where the divine gate is located. And it's likely that he's using Moog's body because Moog acted as like his Uber driver into the realm of shadow. But I kind of wonder if it's because he like has horns, if that is like a component of it as well. And I'll get into that in another video.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad that she picked up on that because it's pretty easy to overlook that despite everything else that the horn sent. So, cool.
But yeah, this is why Radon had to die first in order for him to be reborn. This is also likely why Mikola's cocoon had to be sabotaged and why Mikola had to die as well, because his physical body needed to die in order for him to traverse the other side. I think in addition to that, alongside a lot of the red spider lilies and like the Japanese myth and like mysticism that's happening with the design philosophy of that area.
Oh yeah, I guess she didn't explain that, did she? Or maybe it was, yeah, she just compared it to the gray violets, which was a little bit surprising. But yeah, obviously I've talked about it quite a bit on my streams, but in case anybody doesn't know, the red spider lilies kind of signify death and crossing over to the other side in Japanese culture / mythology. So when you go to Karo's hidden grave and see all those flowers, it is quite evocative as to what that imagery represents. And then Cohiba says to them, the Shadowlands feel more like America's trash bin rather than an afterlife America made. I understand that. It's a little bit awkward talking about the Shadowlands because on one hand, I get what Quelaag is saying and that it does seem like the afterlife, but it also does feel like a kind of de facto afterlife, and the way that it's currently implemented isn't necessarily how it always was or should have been, I guess. So
it makes sense too that Saint Trina is cast down into this pit because it almost echoes like an inverted version of the Izanagi Izanami story of Japanese mythology, where there's a brother and a sister and one of them gets abandoned in the underworld, and so we quite literally see like this big deep dark tunnel that is the fissure that is where we find Saint Trina. And
so tying Saint Trina to Izanami is actually a really interesting way of looking at that myth. I would need to think about that a bit more. And then she had mentioned something a moment ago that I meant to talk about, but got distracted by it. All right, right. So it does bother me that Mikola might have allegedly died in the cocoon or whatnot to get to the Shadowlands, but then when he gets to the Shadowlands, he abandons his body there. So how many bodies does this dude have? He's got his cocoon body, his Halig Tree body type looking thing. Then you've got his Shadowlands body, the Saint Trina body, and then, you know, his god body, and maybe even potentially Radon's body if you want to say that he's puppeting it. But, you know. Queen Matica Lover, nice to see you again. How's it going?
So it's interesting that we're getting all of these like mythological references to death. It seems very intentional, but now we know kind of why Mikola had to do the things Mikola had to do in order to get Radon to the other side and in order to get himself to the other side. But now I want to talk about how. I want to talk about the visual representation of the Boaz and Jacquin pillars that are constantly being represented throughout Belarot and then also at the very tippy top of the tower. I've referenced these.
Yeah, I'm not sure what she's saying, so maybe it's a specific type of spirally pillar. I guess she was about to say it. Dylan, nice to have you again. Kind of reminds you of Melina, who burns her body as a bodiless person. That doesn't bother me as much, because at least after she does that, she seems to stay gone in most endings, you know? But the fact that Mikola comes back and keeps doing stuff beyond all that is a real head scratcher.
Pillars in previous speculation videos, but these are the Solomonic columns that are Roman depictions of the two pillars, the Boaz and Jachin pillars, the divine pillars that are in Abrahamic religion, and they refer to the first temple of Solomon that is located in Jerusalem. While Rome is obviously a very long ways away from Jerusalem, the Romans attempted to depict these pillars, and they became commonly used as an esoteric symbol of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. Also around the 1900s, they were then reused in tarot card esoteric symbolism. If you're a tarot card reader, you're likely familiar with this symbol. It is on the High Priestess tarot card, the J and B pillars that you might see. If you're also a Persona player, you may you may recognize this. But they represent being in balance of opposing forces. So in Western mysticism, if you're standing between these two pillars, you're kind of being seen as a divine figure who is like in equilibrium. But also, if you're standing between these pillars, you are able to...
Where's our Coop Connor? I hear him. All right. And then Corner saying, fun fact, there are spiral columns like this in the Royal Palace in Great Britain. Cool. And then Galaxy Dragon, welcome in. You like the idea that Radon had to die for his soul to be able to cross over, but you still remain unconvinced on how willing he was to do this. Why fight if he just had to be dead to cross over? So this ties back into, I don't know if you were here at the end of last stream, or was it the beginning? No, it was the beginning of last stream. When we were talking about why did Radon accept Mikola's vow, I think part of it could have just been that he was so overconfident that he didn't think he would have died to Mikola. So in his mind, it probably doesn't even matter if he does die, because then it shows that he's not the strongest, and then it was not meant to be. So for him, it was probably like, I don't know if I would call it a win-win, but he just certainly may not have cared so much about the after effects if you lost. And then Elden knows these dudes. You feel like tarot is a Martin thing? You think his wife is into that stuff? I don't know about that, because there's a lot of kind of tarot parallels to Bloodborne, believe it or not. And we need look no further than the Hanged Man runes depiction to that of the Hunter's Mark in Elden Ring. And more specifically, what I mean by that is the tombstones in like the Hunter's Grave and in the Chalice dungeons depict people that are being hung, and they match kind of the tarot card symbolism quite well. Do I think the Elden Beast is Marika's true form? Probably not, if the Elden Ring predates her, and if the Beast is supposed to be part of the ring. I just don't think it works. But now that we know that she was born like in the Shaman village and whatnot. Alright, here we go.
To conduct divine miracles such as healing. These two pillars allow for various prophets to heal the blind, or, heal somebody with ailments. And in a really famous painting done by Raphael titled The Healing of a Layman, it depicts this. I quite literally think that the pillars around Belurot and the spiral motif that we're constantly seeing reference both in-game lore, which is the Crucible Vortex. What? Crucible Vortex. I can talk. Crucible Vortex. And it's also referencing the Divine Gate of Miracles, which Radon is revived between. So we're seeing a divine miracle happening with the revival of Radon. The funny thing is, in tarot and in other symbolism, the entity that's depicted between the pillars, like I said before, is like in balance or in internal equilibrium. It usually means you're able to make like wise or intuitive decisions, but both Marika and Mikola are not in balance. They both portray their other selves at different points in time for different reasons, and they both have motivations that seem to be driven by things that are not necessarily like fully selfless. Like, I do think that Mikola's original intentions had to do with his siblings, but I'll talk about that in another video. But I do think that the abandonment of Saint Trina makes him not in balance. Like he is out of equilibrium, and I think that
So going off that note, and I also dread and relish to bring up the cursed thought that the land of shadow is literally underneath the lands between. If you take that literally and you want to stick with the tarot symbolism, then perhaps one can make the argument that the card is inverted, which could help explain the kind of imbalance which Quaylog is talking about. And then, not too nice to see again, it's been a minute. What if Moog's body was Radahn's motivation? Like he wanted to become a child of Godfrey that desperately? I was about to say, I don't know, but then you kind of brought me back with that last point about tying it into Godfrey. I can see where you're coming from with that angle. Despite that, my vibe check would be that I think Radahn just wanted to be strong like Godfrey, but I've definitely heard much worse theories than that. It's near canon. All right, nope. Now you've lost me again. And then Save Frog, welcome back in. Nice to see you. Go for it, Elden. Post some Discordian facts. All right.
that's very intentional imagery that's being evoked there. But in addition to the Crucible Vortex, there's also a cosmic and celestial function for these spirals that we see, and we find out that they actually perform a function for the character Meteor. Her spiral tail allows her to communicate with other outer gods like the Greater Will, and I kind of wonder if this spiral serves as a means of divine communication and intervention. I've been calling her and Emir's staves divine cell phones, and the twisting of the two fingers with the celestial eye on top that can peer into the cosmos is actually something that we've seen before. Specifically in Bloodborne, we've seen the lumen flowers, which are depicted as sunflowers. They look like an eyeball, like an iris, and they are used to face like a cosmic truth or like a divine truth. And so the living failures are able to use the lumen flowers to commune with these like celestial outer gods. I also think too that Miquella's needle,
I would kind of disagree with that assessment, but I tend to be... I guess I don't even really know the term for it. I can't call myself a literalist with Bloodborne, but let's get her face in a little bit of a better spot. I distracted myself with that so badly. All right, right. So the living failures and the celestial emissaries might be communing with phantasms, as they're called. But one of the things that fascinated me about the way phantasms are referred to in the Japanese, which doesn't have the best of equivalences in English, is seirei, which does mean spirit / phantasm to an extent. However, there's a connotation with seirei, which is that they're kind of more like nature spirits and thus affiliated with plants more specifically. So things like dryads or nymphs, I think, would fall into that category, or gnomes perhaps. So, or is a gnome a cheetah? Anyway, seirei are also like a monster category in like Shin Megami Tensei games, if you're familiar with that kind of thing. So if the phantasms that get stimulated by the cost parasite in a lumenwood are seirei, does that mean that these are kind of plant spirits? I think that's a good possibility. Or it's possible that the plants had parasites within them through being watered with the old blood, essentially, because I think there is more or less a direct line between the way that the lumen flowers are depicted as well as the cold blood flowers. And I've got a pretty cool picture to show that off, if I can find it real quick. I don't remember what I labeled it. Holy crap. How? Oh yeah, it'd be under cold blood. Duh. So if these are the cold blood flower buds, wait, which is which? I'm forgetting the three distinct tiers of them. But anyway, I think you get the smallest tier on the choir garb, which is interested in lumen flowers and whatnot. Then the second tier corresponds with what you get in the lumen flower garden. Is it the lumen flower garden, or is the nightmare one the lumen flower garden? No, because this one's the lumen wood. Right. And then the cold blood flowers are nearly identical to the lumen wood flowers, with the exception of they have like blood on them because they've been growing in cold blood. And then, hey Pigsy, you give Quaylog a lot of leeway because as far as you know, she creates her own theories rather than intermingling with the community and building ideas. Oh, Elden got by the watchdog in the chalice. Is it the first one, or is it like the defiled watchdog? Because that one's a rough one. So anyway, that's just kind of like my disagreement about communing with like the outer gods essentially in Bloodborne. So I think it's a bit more localized in a non-linguistic sense to like the flowers and their immediate vicinity in the nightmare. But, you know, that's not too big of a deal. It's just me being pedantic.
These like celestial outer gods. I also think too that Miquella's needle being an object that allows us to completely cut off intervention from outer gods has this spiral and this like celestial eyeball imagery. It's also like the hermetic snake imagery that we've seen before, but it has like a function in the game too. That's really similar to like Meteor's staff and the maternal staff. Those are the same staffs. The other staff, Emir's staff. For the mortal characters in the game, we do find that suffering allows us to commune with divine gods or like take in the influence of outer gods. So we don't really need divine cell phones per se, but we just need an intense amount of suffering. So for example, the fire giants are able to rip off and burn parts of themselves to then take in the influence of the fell god. Or we see Melina get opened up to divine suffering when Torrent gets burned during the Frenzied Flame ending. We see Romina gets burned and she's able to take in the outer god of rot. Melania stabs herself and she's able to take in the outer god of rot. There seems to be this kind of sense of like, I guess it doesn't have to just be mortals, it can be the demigods too, but any degree of suffering or like asceticism or like despair, lamentation, those kinds of things allow you to be able to take in the influence of an outer god. But yeah.
And that can be extended to the way that Estelle leveled the Eternal Cities, and that's a little bit clearer in the Japanese because Estelle is a byproduct of the Nox despair rather than like the creator of their despair. So that's kind of a big difference depending on one's interpretation of that. And there is also a potential connection between like the Frenzied Flame stuff and despair in the Yellow Annex Tunnel. And of course we see like the Eye of Sauron conjured up between like a half dozen commoners in Liurnia. So despair definitely is a way to channel like, or to grab the attention of external forces, shall we say. And I wonder if part of that is just due to the fact that being in a state of despair provokes the will into reaching out and trying to come to some sort of action, which might bridge the gap between the external world of the Lands Between and the internal world of the individual. But that might not make a ton of sense unless there's like a lot of building up. Hopefully it's good enough. Oh, it's the first Chalice dungeon? Get wrecked, Elden. And then Dylan says, Quaylog also tends to emphasize a lot more non-plot-centric modes of analysis, which gives her stuff a different sort of way of dealing with the material at times. Yeah, so I think the way that Quaylog approaches the lore is actually very grounded, despite using many more thematic parallels, which is kind of interesting because I feel like not many other content creators do as good a job keeping things tight to the actual like facts of the game, as well as being able to incorporate outside sources, but not necessarily overwrite what's already there. So I quite like her approach to the lore.
It seems like the spiral and the eyeball allows you to like receive instructions. So that's also like another really cool function for this like double pillar spiral motif. But I'm going to be making a video about the Crucible, and Raw, I'm going to be making a video about, like the Grand Dam in Bellerot and some of the Bellerot visuals that have the spiral, so you'll hear me bring that up a couple times. But yeah, this video is already too long. I know it's not as long as some of my other longer format content, but yeah. This one just needed to be done, I think, for any of the other videos to make sense. So, okay, bye!
So, I'm not entirely sure what the point of that was. Was it just her saying that the Shadowlands are akin to a Helfin afterlife, or one that was kind of artificially made by Marika? And that might be a point that she builds on later on. That does tend to be perhaps like one of Quaylog's weaknesses, that a lot of the videos are more exploratory rather than making a point and trying to support it. And I don't really think there's anything wrong with that, other than you're like, wait, what just happened in that journey? If it like passed you by somehow, if you're just passively absorbing things.
This is a little PS because I realized it would be really silly of me to not mention it in this video in addition to my Bellerot video, but I absolutely think that the city of Bellerot is building the Divine Tower of Babel. I definitely think it's like a reference to that story, and I think they were using this tower to try to reach the Divine Gate that I was talking about earlier in this video. So yeah, I think that that is the purpose of why they were building stuff out of people. I'll go into it in more detail later. Okay, goodbye!
So that's interesting. She makes it sound as though she believes the Divine Gate was already there, and then the Horn Scent built the tower up to that gate. So that's an interesting idea. I don't really have particularly strong feelings about it one way or the other, partially because there are certain aspects of Anira Limb which does seem completely separate from the Horn Scent, and then other parts which just seem like, no, it's always been a Horn Scent thing, and that's kind of been hard to grapple with. Subscribe for more. I don't remember where I was muted when, but anyway, I said subscribe for more, and oh yeah, that's my cue to remember to like and share to you guys. So, alright, I've already shared that with you guys in the chat. I feel like I'm forgetting something else, damn it. Alright, so, oh yeah, so did you guys hear me talk about how she believes the Divine Gate was already at the top of the tower, or before the tower was there, or not? Doesn't really matter too much either way. That'll just probably be something we need to keep in mind as she builds on that idea for future videos. Speaking of which, it's the future is now, old man, and we can go into what is the Erdtree Elden Ring Sot Diluc lore by Prof or Prof? Wait, what? Oh! Why did it do that rather than going into the playlist? So sorry, Prof or Prof. Instead, the future is now with
starting this video.
These Elden Ring ruins keep me up at night by Quaylog.
Off strong with some pretty hefty disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1.
Her hair's blonde.
One is that I'm actually dog sitting right now, so we have more ambient dog noises in the background. But thankfully, it's my video editor's dog, so I get to put that responsibility on editing out all the dog noises on them. So thank you, ampersand waves. Everybody pray for waves. Disclaimer number 2 is that I know some of you want me to be facing the camera while I'm talking to you guys about lore, and I want to say shout out and thank you to my patrons who have allowed me to be able to invest in this channel, and I'm actually going to be using my next round of Patreon money to be able to afford a teleprompter and a new camera. So thank you so much. You guys make this channel better all the time, and I want to also give a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my YouTube members. Thank you so much for allowing me to be able to do this for you guys. It is such a privilege, and I'm really excited to continue making more videos. Disclaimer.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I never even thought about a teleprompter. Obviously, I don't have a camera, nor do I particularly desire one, but I kind of now wonder if that'd be helpful for reading my lore scripts for videos, but I guess I'm not that worried about it, but I'll just maybe keep that in mind if I feel like I need to make a change that way. I don't know. So, anyway.
And number 3 is that my community and I can't seem to come to a consensus on how to pronounce this region. Some of us have been calling it Rao, some of us have been calling it Ro, and some of us have been calling it Ra. I'm going to be calling it Ra for simplicity's sake, but also because I really like Egyptian mythology, and I'm just putting my foot down about it. But I'm going to be talking about the ancient ruins of Ra today, so let's go.
I call it Rao just because of Hokuto no Ken, and it's funnier that way. Because it's definitely not Rao.
Let's start. We're going to be talking about the ancient ruins of Ra today, which is my favorite region in the game, but it is also one of the most complex as it seems to be changed by a lot of different factions in the game. For example, some of the cultural information has been scraped away by the scholars of antiquity from Belurat, set ablaze by Mesmer's forces, or influenced by the manifestation of Scarlet Rot. Belurat also built new structures on top of these ruins with the addition of the Church of the Bud and the viewing platform that overlooks the Divine Tower. We can tell that these buildings weren't here originally because of the masonry and the roofing. They're not made out of the same black stone that the ruins of Ra are made out of.
True story. And that question has kind of come up more often than I would have thought. That wasn't Ramana like affiliated with the Rao ruin people? I don't think so, precisely because of the different style of the masonry of the Church of the Bud.
These ruins have been through a lot, and it required a lot of effort to tease everything apart. So let's get started with what we know from the base game, and then how each culture has then been impacted by Ra in the present. And then we'll talk about maybe some cut content and some other stuff too. So yeah, let's get started. In the base game, the Ra ruins sprawl across the entire map and are known as the Blackstone Ruins. The giant golem enemies are described to have weapons made of black stone and are from this society. And sure enough, we can find one last stone golem stationed on the Ra plateau. The Ra ruins are also linked to...
There are also a bunch in the base area. Maybe not a bunch, but certainly at the very least 2. The one that snipes you as you go to the little village nearby.
Large structures like the Fire Giant's Forge, and in addition to this, the Fire Giant's Forge has shared assets with the Divine Towers, which I broke down in a previous video that I'll link in the description down below. The Talisman of all Crucibles states that this growth grew on giants, so while our tiny kings, the Divine Bird Warriors, populated these ruins, there's a lot of evidence that giants also lived among the ruins of Ra, along with the dead bodies in Kaled, the mountaintops, and in the specimen storehouse. It appears that gigantism was a little bit more common and widespread than it currently is. I want to make a point to say too that Tony Pepperoni in my community pointed out during one of our
Hey, I know that guy.
Lore Theory Thursdays that the dragons that live on the mountaintops of the giants were actually originally forced off of the mountaintops by the giants. So the dragons were not included in the Club of Ra, the ancient Club of Ra. There are also the Harpy enemies.
Which, if you think about that in relation to the Gate of Divinity and the Elden Ring itself, that's kind of problematic if you believe Fair Missoula had the ring to begin with, or was it just that the Gate of Divinity allowed them to steal the ring from Placidus Axe? Or, like, just what the hell is going on with that? Was the gate made but not used until America's time? It really would have been nice if we had something more to go with all this to point us in a more concrete direction.
That are found around these ruins, and they sing a song in Latin about the fall of the previous era, loosely affiliating them with the ancient ruins of Ra, but we don't hear much about them in the DLC, so I'm not putting too much stock in that, but I'm just kind of keeping it in mind that it seems that there was a bunch of different types of humanoids and creatures that existed in this previous era in tandem with each other. So now that we have a vague idea of what the past may have looked like, let's look at a present civilization that is currently investigating these ruins. I want to start with the civilization most inspired by them, Belurat. Bellerot has a lot of Roman inspiration, specifically the era of Rome that took over Celtic land in 51 BC and then established Roman Egypt in 30 BC. This takes place before the Christianization of Rome in 300 AD, as I feel that Marika and Leondel represent that transition, but I've talked about that in other videos, so I'm not going to touch that here. This would explain why we see Egyptian artifacts scattered around Bellerot and why the Hornsent NPCs have Irish accents.
Is that a clear depiction of the same thing which appears on, like, the tapestries on all the buildings and whatnot? It does look more distinct. So I guess maybe not, but maybe I'll just need to take a closer look sometime.
We see Egyptian artifacts scattered around Bellerot and why the Hornsent NPCs have Irish accents.
Oh, such a joy to smell the scent again.
It's why the Wickermen are present, despite Bellerot's architecture being Roman. The Hornsent NPCs also use a weapon called the Falx, which is used by the Dacians, the Thracians. Is it Thracian? Thracians, and the Scythians, which the Scythians also inspired the Celts down to their metalworking. As far as allegories go, we can understand that Bellerot absorbed and conquered many cultures like Rome did during this period, thanks to the Inquisitors. And so it stands to reason that Ra has been absorbed by Bellerot in a similar fashion. However, the writers make sure to establish that the Hornsent seem to have ancestors from Ra in the Divine Bird Warriors, stating that the Divine Bird Warriors were the very first horned warriors that we now see protecting the Tower of Bellerot. While their migration down to the Bellerot region is unclear, NPCs like Divine Bird Warrior Ornis seem to have fallen off of the foundation of Ra to an already established temple quarter, where he then lived the rest of his life as a guardian deity. This obviously influenced the Hornsent warriors.
Well, I think he was dead at that point that he became the guardian deity, but I digress. Actually, now that I think about it, that might be a possibility, because there is a little bit of an ambiguity about like what constitutes a god in Elden Ring, and I think there's something beyond the tutelary deities which kind of make the Hornsent sound like pseudo-gods, but maybe it's just the tutelary deities after all. I don't quite remember. Yeah, Icarus type of story with the bird warriors. That's how I always took it, yeah.
Their warrior armor and weapons take inspiration from these bird warriors. At some point in history, the scholars of antiquity from Bellerot began to study and emulate Ra's spiritual practices. They worship divine beasts in the same way, by hunting them down and gaining their power. The Crucible Vortex, or Spira, becomes important to the Inquisitors, and they even praise the Crucible for giving them their horns. The scholars document a practice Ra engaged in which allowed them to contain spiritual energy in small stone sculptures called the Ra Burrows. Subsequently, Bellerot's knowledge was stolen by Mesmer's forces, and at this point you can probably see why I was stressing about this video, as the transition of knowledge between all of these different groups make it super difficult to parse, and I am so sorry for my editor. While Mesmer's original aim was to annihilate all aspects of Hornsent culture, Fire Knights Salza and Heald urged that the Hornsent specimens and Hornsent cultural knowledge be preserved in the specimen storehouse. Despite Queen Marika and Mesmer's desire to have the Hornsent eradicated, Queen Marika benefited from the preservation of this knowledge, as we see stone tablets and birch scrolls in Queen Marika's bedchambers. I'll speculate what she may have been researching in another video, but Miquella was also fascinated by this knowledge. One of these birch scrolls that illustrates Radahn's vow, the secret rite, can be found in the storehouse and given to Freya even though she can't fucking read it.
Will I ever make sense of this jumble?
It was used by Miquella to attach Radahn.
How much better would this video have been if you just heard Freya way off in the background just saying that damn line like for a full minute before Quayla gets to this point of the video?
Soul to Mohg's remains. That Lord must usher in God's return, and that the God will attach himself or herself to their chosen Lord. Choosing Radahn thematically ties in with Radahn being a lion-themed golden warrior whose soul is inhabiting a horned figure, similar to the horned warriors, and also echoing the divine beasts. I want to say that Godfrey and Sir.
And that is some of the stuff that they could have made a bit more prominent if they wanted to foreshadow it a bit better. Now, they didn't necessarily have to foreshadow this entirely in the base game, but it really sucks that all we ever get are just like Ansbach and Freya's lines. And I That's pretty much it, because I wouldn't even count the Divine Scroll as truly foreshadowing that. But anyway.
Rosh also vaguely emulate this, but I can do a whole video on them alone at another time. But now that we see how they've impacted other groups, let's take a look into why this region seems to be so important. The Crucible. Geographically, there is something very unique about Ra. While there are special horned enemies across the Shadowlands, killing the animals that are native to this particular section of ruins in Ra gives you access to a special crafting item known as the Spirit Calculus, which says an exceedingly rare to find calculus, suffused with spirituality and found by hunting horned beasts in the ancient ruins of Ra. It has a...
You know what? I never really thought too much about the calculus aspect of it. And with spirits being drawn into things like stone elsewhere, does that explain the growths themselves that... Well, hold on. I don't know which came first, the growth or the spirits. And to an extent, because like the things that are touched by the Crucible grow the horns and whatnot, one would assume that the spirit stuff could come first. But now I'm wondering whether or not, because horns act as mediums or catalysts for spirits, whether that stuff could have come first, or if there's a bit of a symbiotic effect going on. And thank you, Elden Enthusiast, but I would appreciate that if you worded it a bit differently. And then Pigsy. You don't know if it needed to be foreshadowed that much. It wasn't like everyone saw the Elden Beast coming. To be fair, I also wish that the Elden Beast's ending was a bit more like the Moon Presence, that it would only show up if you gathered all the runes. But I wanted that one to be more esoteric. And okay, Pigsy, but to speak to that point a bit more seriously, a different way, I do think that the Elden Beast is actually foreshadowed pretty well, all things considered. And you might be saying, like, what? That doesn't make sense. When you look back at it, you kind of get hints as to what's going on with the Elden Beast when you look at any of the minor Erdtrees that have ulcerated tree spirits around them. Because what do these tree spirits look like? Kind of snakes, and of course the Elden Beast isn't exactly snake-like, but there is enough visual similarities there where I would say that there is more foreshadowing about that than Ridicola. It's kind of a weird way to say it. Macan? Anyway. Phantom Leaves doesn't believe the scroll says anything about the god attaching to the Lord. It doesn't. Kind of. It says that the god is guided by the Lord and the Lord needs a vessel. So if the vessel equals Moog for Radahn's soul, that's one thing. And then Radahn's soul is supposed to guide the god soul. It's kind of there, but I mean, I wouldn't have initially thought Radahn just from that description alone. Stoat thinks the stone would have come first and that the glintstone sorcerer hearts mirror that because they're inspired by them. Thinking about that. I don't know. Just because we're told that the things that are crucible touched can grow things like horns and knots and wings and whatnot. So I think it's just kind of like the energy of life, perhaps, but maybe a bit more symbiotic.
Distinctive acrid odor, which some claim to be a sign of a particular spiritual potency. A calculus, also known as a calculus stone, is a type of solid material that forms in the kidneys, and I feel that this item is referencing a couple of things. First, the obvious one, kidney stones. In some old medical beliefs in parts of Asia, the kidneys were thought to store, make, transform, and distribute spiritual essence. In the English language, they're also known as calculus stones in medical science, but aesthetically, the item itself resembles a teratoma, which is a type of growth that can be filled with hair, teeth, and keratin because of stem cells. This item can also be...
So that's pretty interesting, and that would definitely tie in a lot to the Crucible Mother Talisman and all those Crucible features. And I do have more to say about kidneys, but I'm going to see if she says more here.
Used to make a sprite stone, and then detonated using a bond stone. which kind of resembles sperm. So for those of you out there who thought that the divine spirals resembled DNA, I don't think that you're that far off. This torrent of spiritual energy being associated with stem cells and reproductive cells is pretty on the nose. There's some fantastical medical science embedded in the world building, and not to get too out there, but DNA strands, flower petals, tree branches, horns, and spirals are all manifestations of the Fibonacci sequence in nature.
Where's Dylan? So yeah, going back to the kidney stuff, kidneys also filter out the blood of its impurities, I think. I'm not a freaking medical doctor, so if anybody wants to clarify on that front, they can. And with gold being within blood and things like beast blood and like dragon hearts and whatnot, I wonder if that is also related to the spirit calculi, if the soul is stored in the blood and that gets filtered through the kidney, and then over time the spirit can harden like a stone and literally become like the calculi. I think that kind of works unironically, so yeah. You're getting beat up by Hippo. Hippo's definitely one of the bosses of the DLC. Nah, you're getting beat up by Camera. The Camera's the boss.
In the 1500s, the golden ratio was seen as divine, simplistic, and orderly, and it's one of the most efficient patterns in nature. So it's really cool to see it being used in a fictional setting to world build. I think it's a really cool creative decision on the artists and the writers' part. Anyway, back to lore stuff and away from art design. The people of Ra made stone burrows that acted as containers for spiritual essence that's present within the calculus stone. To craft this item, you need a stone burrow, a beast horn, and a spirit calculus. Beast's horn states that they're suffused with spirituality and that the crucible has a particularly strong influence on the beasts in the realm of shadow. This further connects Ra to a powerful concept known as the crucible, and may be why the Hornsent develop horns in the first place. The Hornsent view the crucible as sacred for the refinement wrought through its evolutionary gifts, most prominently their tangled horns. This ties in with Marika wanting to seal away this particular region, and also ties into the punishment of the misbegotten. The misbegotten are held to be punishment for making contact with the crucible, and from birth, they're treated as slaves, or worse. Any infant born with horns is also labeled a foul omen and thrown into the sewers, which it seems that she was trying to suppress these aspects of the crucible, but I'm going to get back on topic. There are other things that link the crucible to the Ra ruins. Devonia, who's the first of the Crucible Knights, set out on a journey to discover the origin of the Crucible, which seems to exist in or around Ra. An aspect of the Crucible is a flower, and the Church of...
I don't know if I would say like the Crucible exists in one specific location, and in some ways I think the Devonian thing is a little bit of a red herring, because it's kind of on the path to get to the Divine Tower, which might have a lot to do with the Crucible or its previous energies. But man, do I have a lot of questions about the Crucible, and as to whether or not it should actually be considered primordial, or if it is something a bit more recent in the Lands Between history, just because there's a lot of little things about it which makes it seem as though it shouldn't have been entirely native to the Lands Between. Or one of the questions I have is then, why are certain things more Crucible touched than others? Why were things not blended a bit more equally? And of course, when you say things get blended a bit more equally, it would just be another way of saying that things wouldn't appear blended at all, because that's how they should look. But yeah. So Paisan, nice to see you again. Iron Lung. And you're asking, where was Radahn's soul hanging out at? Oh, it's just chilling in the primeval current of space or something, between the Lands Between and the Realm of Shadow. Who knows? Or maybe it was just chilling in the gate. And then Pigsy was saying the golden ratio is also in the architecture of the game. You need to work out if that's what's going on in the Elden Ring as well. Elden's mind is spinning with Crucible stuff right now. If only I was comfortable enough stealing Quelaag's titles and saying the Crucible keeps me up at night. Yeah.
The Bud existed here, worshipping flowers that used to be unaffiliated with the Scarlet Rot. We find that the aspect of the crucible bloom is located here, as well as the talisman of all crucibles, which includes horns, feathers, flowers, thorns, breath, and wings. Given the usage of the incantation Spira on the Divine Tower and its proximity to Ra, the Crucible Vortex, and the Spirit Calculus farming location, I feel that from the Divine Tower up to the ruins of Ra is the whole Crucible. Some members of my community speculate that this could have been where the Elden Stars originally fell, but it's unclear. In fact, I can confidently say that I don't have an actual answer as to what the Crucible truly is, outside of some vague inferences from the item descriptions here. The Crucible armor states that it holds the power of the Crucible life, the primordial form of the Erdtree. It strengthens aspects of Crucible incantations. And then the Gilded Great Shield says a red tinge on gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree, a color of homeward yearning. Devonia's hammer reads a weapon forged of primordial gold, marked by its reddish hue and inhabited by ancient holiness. A torrent of life is engraved upon the striking face. And then the
Man, it's so annoying to me that the Gilded Great Shield, translation stuff aside, is used by Godric to harken back to the time of Godfrey, and that the Crucible Knights themselves harken back to Godfrey. And one thing that I've been thinking about a bit more in relation to the whole Crucible Knight fiasco is then if they are of like the previous civilization or whatnot and Godfrey leads them, does that tell us something about Godfrey and who he was before the America times? Or when exactly did they join forces with him? Were they conquered by him and were just like, oh man, might makes right, he's the right guy, and just kind of followed him after the fact? And so because Devonia is called the oldest of the Crucible Knights, yet also doesn't know about the origins of the Crucible, that is also a little bit vexing to me. So, right.
aspect of the Crucible Horns incantation says that this is a manifestation of the Erdtree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial crucible, where all life was once blended together. So it could be that the Crucible is just a region, or it could be that the Crucible is that divine light that's in the spirit calculus that causes a lot of the excessive horn growth on a lot of these different entities. Whatever this spiritual light or the spiritual essence is, wherever that came from, could be.
And wouldn't it be nice if that spiritual light was then like more red tinted gold in its hue? There's just a lot of visual incongruities with the Crucible related things, which just torments me.
Be the Crucible. Or I think that another thing that me and my community have been speculating on is that the region that the Divine Tower was built on top of, because the Divine Tower is that big spiral tower, that may be where the Crucible actually is, and that Ra was just in proximity of it. So maybe there's just like I almost feel like it's the whole western side of the map that could.
So here's a cursed lore thought for you guys. Did y'all ever think it was weird how freestanding the Divine Tower was? Well, what if it spiraled around a tree? Enjoy.
Would be the Crucible, because I feel like there's a lot of this really interesting vortex energy and primordial matter and a lot of this really cool stem cell stuff that's happening in these locations. I want to get into some cut content speculation now, and feel free to disregard this section of the video if you don't like cut content. I'm going to put a disclaimer alert. It's cut content, babes. It's not that serious. So, Ra is a Bronze Age civilization. We get the verdigris talisman that we find from Moore at the base of the female statue. It's an oxidized bronze or a copper, and Moore's equipment also ties into this. Moore's shield has this unique ability where it can create a teal bulwark that protects the user even after death. While I say that the Fell God is tied to the Bronze Age civilizations and the Fire Giants, I feel like this outer god of verdigris has some different abilities that seem less destructive and more protective, but I'm still uncertain. A neat little fun fact, though, is that the Miranda idol, is that what it's called? The little Miranda flower idol, appears like it could have been verdigris underneath the scarlet rot that's on top of it, and the art resembles that of Moore's set, which is tied to Ra, given that we find the verdigris talisman here. I would have loved to learn more about the Miranda flowers and the flower crucible, as we know that they can use pillars of light, and I feel like that light theme ties in with the fact that the zone as a whole is associated with light, whereas the abyssal forest and like the eastern side of the map is associated with darkness. We can find an ancient ruin here that allows us to
And speaking of like light and dark and that kind of dual dichotomy between them, it might tie into all that stuff relating to the spiral and piercing the heavens and whatnot. And I think that's an interesting observation, pointing out that perhaps one half of the map is light and the other is dark. I don't know how well that works depending on if you out of sequence the altars, because apparently they change depending where you go, so that might influence one's thoughts about that. But nonetheless, it does really bother me that we get one of the, what I would call like Rao type altars in the catacombs, because then does that imply that catacombs in general were originally built by the Rao civilization? Was that altar moved? Did this altar get placed here later? I don't really know.
complete the Sword of Light quest, and the Church of the Bud, since buds were being worshipped and were unafflicted with scarlet rot previously to Romina, it seems like maybe there was this flower of light that used to bud here. Ra seems to be teeming with this influential divine spiritual energy that is depicted in the spirit calculus as a white light, and the ruins of Unte, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, can become the ruins of darkness, which
I like, as though somebody's going to be able to correct us. Well, maybe there will be somebody. I just call it the ruins of Auntie because that'll make me always remember what it is.
makes sense as they're in proximity of the abyssal forest, like I said before. So there seems to be a lot of motifs of light and darkness in the DLCs specifically, and I do feel like this may tie into Meteor and the cosmic story of the DLC and light traveling and life and death and the creation of the universe. I think it's like Miyazaki's creation myth is tied to this region of Ra. To kind of give like a whole synopsis on how I feel like the history played out, I feel that Farum Azula, Jagged Peak, and the Finger Ruins would be referencing a lot of the Neolithic eras of history, as a lot of the different artifacts that we find in the game are Neolithic pieces of art that we can find in real life. And I want to credit Tarnished Archaeologists for pointing out that Farum Azula is based off of the necropolis of Varna, and I want to give a credit to Cuke for talking to me about the Tower of Silence, which has also influenced Farum Azula, and also Emily Mitchell, who showed me this really cool Neolithic flute that looks a lot like the Finger Ruins flute. And I believe it was also Tarnished Archaeologist that brought up there is a like French tomb that also mirrors the fingerprint shield and some of the fingerprint art that's happening. So there's this whole era of Stone Age art and like Neolithic art that mirrors this era of beasts in Elden Ring. I would say this is like the era before written language. It's before a lot of like blacksmithing stuff. And then the era of dragons gets displaced from the mountaintops by the fire giants during the Bronze Age. Ra and the fire giants would be another reference to that Bronze Age society. I think that the Master of Beasts artistic motif from the Indus Valley and from other parts of like India, Asia, like really ancient Pakistan, and like ancient Egypt, I'll put some pictures. The Master of Beasts motif definitely echoes in a lot of Ra's spiritual practices, so I think that's super cool. And then I feel that the Ul Palace ruins would have been active during this period too, given a lot of the Mesopotamian references that are happening. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool historical references that give us like a vague idea of what time period each event in the game happens. It can kind of like help us figure out like, okay, so this is the area before the Christianization of Rome, so this must have happened before. And sure enough, in the in-game lore,
And then all of the stuff with the Blackstone / Rao ruin still kind of remains ambiguous as far as I'm aware. And then, yes, Dylan, Ymir does say it like Meter instead of Meteor. So, hello, goodbye, nice to see you again. The furled finger curiously also has a light and darkness motif in the bracelet on the finger. Really? For what it's worth, there is still that light and darkness motif in hand, I guess pun intended, with the two fingers and Assassin's approach and like the darkness incantation and the way they can manipulate gold or light to create remembrances, and of course shadow bound beasts and whatnot. All right, here we go.
Happens before, so we're able to kind of make sense of what's happening because so much of the in-game lore is left out, and I think that Miyazaki and the art team are using a lot of art history and art to communicate their story. So it's a whole fucking lot, and I'm doing my best out here. So thank you so much for watching this video. I want to also make a little point to talk about some really random notes at the end of this video. For some reason, Mesmer's flame leaves behind small embers that also act as sprites and can be housed in raw burrows, similarly to the spirit calculus. And I think this may be the Abyss companion because Mesmer's associated with the Abyssal Serpent, and his fire has this abyssal nature to it. I think that this may be the darkness or the...
There's also a spirituality within Mesmer's flame, taken kind of verbatim from one of the Fire Knight armors. What's his... Not Saul's up with the other dude. Wedo? I can't remember his name. Fire Knight. Not that one. Not that. Wego. I don't know. Right. So, as far as we go, did I just lose it? It sucks. Okay, Death Mask Helm. Huh. It is called Death Mask. Anyway. Helm of Wego, Elder among the Fire Knights. 2 warped death masks stacked atop one another. Blah blah blah. Gnawed at by loneliness, the old man turned his attention to the spirituality of Mesmer's flame, using it in a rite of resurrection. Yet the soulless bodies he brought to life were no comfort to poor old Wego. Wago? Interesting. Okay. And yeah, it definitely says it's a spirituality in Mesmer's flame here, which is interesting. Especially because, well, is he adding souls to the bodies, or were the bodies originally soulless? Or are they still soulless after he adds the flame? I guess I'll need to think about that, but anyway.
Abyssal companion to the light version of the sprites, if that makes sense. So there's like how there's a sword of darkness and a sword of light. I think that there is a sprite burrow of darkness and a sprite burrow of light. So it's pretty interesting to see that it has a companion. And then also when I was discussing the Christianization of Rome, I bring up Irish accents. Obviously, I don't know what ancient Celtic accents look like, and I don't know if FromSoft had access to that, but I think it's really cool that we see this persistence of Irish accents throughout Belurot and like throughout a lot of these ancient Celtic societies, and then we see it again when Landell Capital gets established with the Finger Maidens who have Irish accents, and they also vaguely resemble the Grandams aesthetically, so it kind of further shows this trickle down of culture from raw Belurot and then into Marika's age. So,
and building off that point, it might also be worth considering that Horalu's name is it Celtic or is it Gaelic in origin? Fudge, I don't remember. Whoopsies. And then nice to see you again. Maybe Mesmer's Dark Snake is nibbling on that spirituality. Maybe. That could help explain things. Celtic is Gaelic. Is there like a time difference between the two cultures, if you can call them two, or anything like that? There's two kinds of Gaelic? Not really? Okay, Irish and Scottish. That's weird. Well, just because, like, the geography. I obviously don't know the most about that topic. So if you guys want to elucidate, feel free. And then Josh Thane, or is it Tane? Welcome on into the stream. And then Stella, nice to see you. All right, here we go.
So you love to see these like cycles of beliefs and practices, even though Marika is trying to distance herself from the past in a lot of ways. Another really cool little fun fact that somebody pointed out is that Godfrey and Godric have Cornish accents, and all of the Liurnians have Welsh accents, which gives us further regional lore to understand what period of history certain things are. But yeah.
So if Godfrey has a Cornish accent, maybe that doesn't work out as well after all, despite his name? Or maybe it just shows a difference in the eras, perhaps.
That's it. That's all. This video was a fucking nightmare. Sorry that it's really long. Okay, bye! I totally forgot to film the conclusion of my video, so here we go.
I was wondering, so yeah, like I said, sometimes Quelaag's endings are not always there.
Rome conquered the Celts, and they conquered an area called Gaul, and the people in that area worshipped a god called Belenus, who is the Celtic sun god of fire, and he's like a cleansing fire. He's like a healing, cleansing fire. So there's this association, sorry, I'm like shaking my whole setup. There's this association with Belurat looking like Rome, conquering people who have Irish accents, and then also the fell god that is like in their sagas being a sun god, or like his imagery resembling a sun. And then also we have like the dung eater who has the mending rune of the fell curse, which looks like there's little tiny suns in addition to horns in it, and it kind of looks like a cell, if a sun were like a cell being split. There's a lot of like really cool, like I said, medical mutations regarding divine light, and I think that Belenus is being referenced in the story, both with like all of the
The mitosis is the powerhouse of the sun.
references to Julius Caesar and the Celtic people, but then also with the Wicker Man, and also with the Fell God, and blah 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 blah. I think that the fact that the fire giants are associated with the ruins of Ra also play into this as well, and George R. R. Martin is no stranger to using real-world history as a means to inform the lore or the world building of his stories. I've mentioned this before, but Game of Thrones is based off of the War of the Roses, so it is really cool to see that there's like another historical thing that's happening here. So yeah. Okay, I think that's it. I think that might be it. Oh, also, another cool historical thing, because we were talking about Egypt before, and there's definitely some like Egypt stuff that's happening in Belurat. There is the god of sun who fights a serpent, and I think that one half of the map, which is associated with like Ra and Belurat being associated with like the sun god and this divine light and the sword of light, versus the right half of the map, the eastern half of the map, being associated with the abyss and the sword of darkness, and also the abyssal serpent, I think plays into the myth of sorry, I'm like trying to remember all these names, plays into the myth of Apep and Ra, which I'll send a picture to my video editor. But yeah, the Guardian Watchdog also kind of resembles this little reference. So we have a war happening between the sun and the abyss. Cool. Okay, bye.
I also had some thoughts about Marika and tying her to snakes in a different way. Maybe we just talked about that briefly on the last stream, but I kind of forgot what I wanted to bring up that I thought was worth considering in all of that. So anyway, I do wonder whether or not Quelaag, at the end here of comparing the war between Ra and the snake, is between the civilizations of the Hornsent and Mesmer specifically, or if she thinks there is another snake that predated Mesmer or anything like that. So Lou is French, so maybe Gaul isn't far off. So the thing is, Lou, as it's transliterated right there, could be French, or it could be meant to be read like this, Luch. So there's a lot of questions which come up to it. And for anyone's like, oh, well, the names they certainly decided a long time ago, I would just turn back to the cut content where we get Ania's dialogue introducing the characters of the game with Horaru, the gold mask. So I do think the Godfrey split identity thing kind of happened pretty late in the story's development cycle there. So anyway, that was another good video. I'm still not sure what exactly the conclusion was. Maybe that's a little bit of my fault, but here we go. I'm going to link it for you guys in chat now if you want to give Quelaag some more support. So, all right. Those are the 2 Quelaag videos that I have queued up for tonight. We did go through them pretty quickly because I tend to not really have too much to comment on her videos, so I might need to find like another one towards the end. We'll see how this next one goes and whatnot. Yes, Lugh, the sun god of the Tuatha de Danann. Danann. I don't know. Anyway, to run away from speaking more Celtic / Gaelic / whatever, let's go on into theological themes and narrative archetypes in Elden Ring, an analysis by Credence Questions. All right, here we go.
Before you write a comment, I know that Elden Ring is based generally around Norse mythology.
Hold on, let me back up to the beginning.
Before you write a comment, I know that Elden Ring is based.
All right, that's it. Next video. No, sorry, I just couldn't help myself.
Generally around Norse mythology. I'm not going to be ignoring that. What I'd like to do is talk about all the kinds of narrative archetypes that pop up in this game, with a specific focus on Judeo-Christian themes. There will be some overlap with other mythological stories, but that is to be expected. When we look at the themes and stories that play out in Elden Ring, we will explore how they are both similar and different from some Judeo-Christian beliefs, and also how some of those stories exist across time in more than just the Bible. FromSoftware's previous titles, namely the Dark Souls games, have some really incredibly well-crafted story beats that reference common archetypal ideas, both Judeo-Christian and not. I want to make a video about those games as well, but for now we're talking about Elden Ring, though I'll definitely will be making comparisons to at least the Dark Souls story as well because of some similarities.
Alright, so just to give Credence Questions some content creation feedback here would be to slow down one's speech. It's really difficult to remember to do that, especially when you don't have like somebody that you're looking at to get the visual feedback that you need to slow down for them to understand you. But that'll make your videos a bit clearer to understand, especially for people who may not be native speakers of the language. So, yeah. Obviously, during the streams, I should probably speak more slowly and enunciate a bit better, but I be lazy and I don't. So anyway, yeah, about the Judeo-Christian thing. So on one of my videos, I think it was about like the original sin of Dark Souls and the Scholar of the First Sin or something like that, I'd used the term Judeo-Christian, and I had like somebody in the comments like jumping down my throat saying like not to use that term. I'm like, okay, what should I use instead? And they're like, don't say it. I'm like, well, that doesn't help me. So Corn, if you're not AFK or anything, do you have any input about that? Like, so for anybody who's like wondering about this, and it seems like it's coming out of left field, apparently the terminology for Judeo-Christian may have some less than savory roots to try to tie into, I think it was before Nazism, but essentially like that kind of fascist ideology would go on to help differentiate a certain worldview from others, and because of that, some people view the term more negatively. So rather than just using something like Abrahamic, but one of my issues of trying to say like Abrahamic versus Judeo-Christian is because Islam is technically an Abrahamic religion, then there's a lot of stuff that I feel may make more sense from like the Jewish/Christian lens point of view than one which incorporates even like Islam. But yeah. All right, hello, goodbye. You take it easy, and thanks for dropping by. And then Peanut Bobo, nice to see you again. And Elden Enthusiast, you have a good night. Is Abrahamic a better term for monotheistic stuff? I don't know. Like, I mean, certainly it is a bit more non-confrontational or non-controversial, I suppose, but I don't know if that's like it really implies the same kind of thing, if that makes sense. No, but we're not strictly talking about Christianity because it's the shared beliefs between Judaism and Christianity and stuff like that. All right, Asinex, you take care. Everybody's dipping out after the Judeo-Christian comments. My condolences. Don't leave me. All right, so let's go ahead and go back into the video. Yeah, so Stella said it's sometimes used as a dog whistle to otherize Muslims specifically. Okay, I thought there was more to it than just that, but I do know it can be a dog whistle.
Last thing that I want to preface with is that I am no expert on Elden Ring's lore. I know a lot about what's going on, enough to satisfy my own understanding, I guess, but given the nature of FromSoftware's confusing and indirect world and story building, I will undoubtedly get some things wrong, and I'm going to see some things differently than other people do. With that said, and without much further ado, I'd like to get into this. I'm not going to cover this in any particular order. I'm going to approach it sort of in the order in which you encounter the areas and learn things about in the game, but definitely going to go off on tangents in each piece to cover whatever is necessary. There's no better place to start than with the opening cutscene, where we first learn about what's going on in the Lands Between. There's a lot of details here, and I'll get into the specifics of all the demigods more so later on. We have the setup of a pretty classic story here, with the introduction of a parental power figure in Queen Marika, and then in the squabbling for power among her offspring. It's reminiscent of Norse and Greco-Roman mythology, as well as the stories of the patriarchs in Judeo-Christian tradition, that's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Specifically, we have a focus on a queen mother, which is pretty traditionally different, because the feminine is usually used as a symbol of nature and chaos, and a singular father figure is usually holding all the children together. That's Jewish God, that's Zeus, that's Odin, that's Osiris. We'll learn more about this as we go into the game's story, but that may shed more light on the usage of a queen here. We also learn that this takes place in a space called the Lands Between. This is a pretty common trope in just FromSoftware's work. In Dark Souls, you are transported from the land of men to basically the land of the lords, which is a place.
So it looks like this came out maybe literally the day before the DLC released. So that's kind of wild. Okay. So I'll try to keep that in mind for like the rest of the video and whatnot, depending on what parallels he draws here. So Josh said you can't get behind that because the first time we see Yahweh is a storm god in a pantheon of different gods. Then he became the most prominent god, and then he became the only god. And then Pixie said Judeo-Christian isn't their favorite term, but for other reasons. We all understand the idea this guy is trying to communicate when he uses the term. Right. And so I just wanted to have a bit of a dialogue in case anybody had a better answer, because we definitely have people who are more knowledgeable about this topic than I am. So I was hoping that I'd get something, cleared up.
Specifically for them. Dark Souls is a fight upward through the lands of the gods. However, in Elden Ring, we are dealing with something that I think is more similar to Earth. It is a land between, just like the Earth is. Maybe a...
So this is the third time he's done it, and it doesn't bother me that much, but I can imagine it can get on other people's nerves more. And for credence, I would also suggest that when you make mouth noises like your lips smacking together or your tongue like ticking, that you might want to go through and edit those out, because that is one way to turn away a lot of people from a video who might have some like audio issues in listening to stuff. And of course that's rich coming from me in my stream setup where you guys kind of get my unfiltered mouth noises and everything like that. So anyway, it is just a nicer thing to do for like dedicated lore videos and whatnot.
Realm that exists between heaven and hell, or between Mount Olympus and Hades. The gods come from outside to rule the lands of men. This idea alone makes the demigods seem like the angels and demons fighting over the control of Earth.
I don't think I'd agree with that, but I'm going to back it up just to see if he does say that the way that I think he's saying it.
This is a pretty common trope in just FromSoftware's work. In Dark Souls, you are transported from the land of men to basically the land of the lords, which is a place specifically for them. Dark Souls is a fight upward through the lands of the gods. However, in Elden Ring, we are dealing with something that I think is more similar to Earth. It is a land between, just like the Earth is, maybe a realm that exists between heaven and hell, or between Mount Olympus and Hades. The gods come from outside to rule the lands of men. This idea alone makes the demigods seem like the angels and demons fighting over the control.
Okay, so he's talking about the lands of men, so maybe like the place where the confessors go to. I don't necessarily entirely disagree with that idea, but I also don't necessarily agree with it that much either, just because other than kind of having Mesmer in the realm of shadow based on like America's directive, we don't have much information about the lands outside, I guess, if we want to call it that. So do the demigods even really care about the lands outside, or is it really just like the internal politics of the lands between which matters to them?
Control of Earth. There is a war between the demigods, fighting for power, essentially. The Elden Ring throughout the game is a sheer representation of power. Even in pieces, it gives the demigods enough power to all betray one another over it. Then we are told that this war led the demigods and the lands between to be abandoned by the greater will. The usage of religious terminology in all of FromSoftware's games is no coincidence. They are utilizing those concepts on purpose. This is equatable to the will of God. So is the fighting for power. Those in the lands between have been abandoned by God, much like the Israelites are threatened with when they're disobedient to God in the Old Testament. Next up, we learn about the tarnished and get another more specifically Judeo-Christian religious reference, grace. Long-lost grace, guiding grace, golden grace, grace which blesses. The grace of the greater will, the grace of God. The concept of grace in the game specifically calls to mind the Holy Spirit to me. It is something which guides people in the correct direction, though if they are overcome by the state of the world, they lose it and are no longer able to see it working in their lives. Something else comparable might be faith. In the beginning of having faith, it is a fire working inside someone. The sights of grace that we light are reminiscent of fires. But if the person with fiery faith is exposed to the true state of the world, they may slowly lose their faith and lose sight of the meaning of life. They become...
And I do think faith is probably a decent parallel to what's going on with the sights of grace and the guidance of grace in general, in that it doesn't necessarily have to be faith in a religious kind of sense, or like faith towards an ideal or an order or anything like that. It could just be having faith in oneself that they can persevere to become Elden Lord. That might be the ultimate deciding factor for that kind of thing, which is a pretty big consistent theme in their games at this point, in my opinion. So, what else? Right. One of the weirder things to me about Elden Ring is how grace is tied to fate. Not just faith, but he might go into that more as well.
Tarnished, tainted by the forces of the world. No hope, no faith, no grace. So we are specifically told that a tarnished of no renown is then blessed with grace once again, and bid to come to the lands between. And that's where we begin, fire ignited or reignited, to do the bidding of the greater will. When we arrive in Limgrave, it is the start of the story. We are greeted straight out of the gate, at the first sight of the grace, with our first temptation. Our first indication is to the corruption of the land. His name is Vare, and we don't know it then, but he is a servant of Mohg, Elden Ring's satanical figure. We'll get to Mohg later, but I think it's important to note that much like Adam and Eve, we are introduced into this beautiful landscape that at first glance looks perfect and peaceful, like the Garden of Eden, and immediately introduced to a representative of the serpent, who tells us that he is the alternative option. For now,
which is kind of funny now that we have the context of the DLC to recontextualize everything, and I wonder if Credence would still assert that Mohg is a satanic stand-in, which And then Pixie is asking if the Tarnished is standing up in the Erdtree. Maybe the place Mikla's memory is, because it is a memory place inside the Erdtree. So yeah, I do tend to think that in the opening cutscene, we might either be coming from the Erdtree or like going out of the Erdtree into the lands between or something like that, but it has always been ambiguous. And if you think about how the Erdtree kind of resurrects us, then it would make sense that if our memory was carved into it, if we were hewn into the Erdtree, that we would potentially have to come out of it to be revived. But I digress. And then Conscom said, you feel like Mesmer would be the more devil figure. So even that, I wouldn't necessarily agree with. Unless you want to make the controversial point that, like, the devil is working on God's behest, which I'll just leave that alone. Let's just say that much. And it is worth remembering this came out literally one day before the DLC released, so he kind of jumped the gun a little bit. And then Paisan says Rykard gives the most satanic energy, in your opinion. I could see it, especially with him being blasphemous and affiliated with, like, literal brimstone and lava. That's pretty fair. He says, to be fair, it feels like the DLC may be an intentional subversion of Moog as the devil. My man's beat the allegations. And then right next to Venice, nice to see you again. And you said grace was taught to you as the will and desire to fulfill the will of God. And Mesmer seems like a Cain reference. Cain. Interesting. So do you think Mesmer killed any of his siblings? I was going to say brothers, but, you know, maybe it's a bit more. Yeah. All right. Anyway, let's go on. And then Captini, welcome back in. And I thought somebody else came back in and I may have forgotten. Well, anybody who's come in, welcome back to the stream. Hope you're doing well.
Now, follow the guidance of grace, but don't forget about Vare. It gives you another option. Upon exploring Limgrave, it's obviously not Eden. It is perhaps the last corner of the world that is not entirely corrupted and fallen apart, though it still pretty much is. The following of the Grace leads us up to Stormville Castle, the home of the demigod Godric. Before getting too close, we're stopped by Margit the Fell Omen. Once again, we'll talk about the omens in more detail, but they are considered a literal bad omen. Sort of like a sign of how bad things are. They remind me very strongly of lepers, which are mentioned a lot in the Bible, for example. Margit attempts to snuff out our flame of ambition before we get too far, but if you manage to beat him, then you have been weighed in the balance and found suitable to continue. Despite looking relatively nice on the outside, the castle is in degradation inside. The unfolding
I thought he was talking about Margit for a second. I was like, oh wow, he's pretty nice, huh?
Story is that Godric, through a horrific process called grafting, is using other beings to make himself more powerful. Godric much seems to display the deadly sin of envy. Being the lowliest of the remaining demigods, he is essentially insecure, and doing everything he can to display his greatness to his predecessor Godfrey. It is to call to mind...
Ooh, I wonder if he's going to go with the deadly sin parallels throughout the video. I know people have tried to do it in the past, but I think we have an issue with the number of the sins, so maybe he has found a way to, like, overcome that, or maybe this will just be an argument of convenience. Time will tell. I'd be surprised by how many women like Margit. Not necessarily. I just meant, like... Anyway.
The lowest of gods from Greek, Norse, and other pantheons who try to compete with their stronger and more recognized brethren. In fact, in order to have a fighting chance, he grafts to himself a great dragon to give himself more firepower. Dragons are always displayed as ancient and powerful in FromSoft games. In Judeo-Christian theology, serpents are associated primarily with evil and the devil and his angels. In many instances, the demon commonly associated with the sin of envy is actually Leviathan, the massive biblical sea serpent. You can see this occurrence as Godric giving himself over fully to evil, calling no longer upon the greater will or the Erdtree, but rather upon the ancient evil, the wise and cunning serpents, the flames, to help him. And they only still...
Oof, I don't know about this, because I feel like that kind of serpent was more abyssal in nature and affiliated with the sea, and I don't really think that works with Godric and a kind of sky dragon, but I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Still result in his demise. In relation to Stormveil and Godric, it's worth mentioning that a devoted explorer will find their way to the bottom of the castle's lowest depths, where they can discover the horrifying body of Godwyn. They may not know it at the time, but we will discuss Godwyn's story a little bit more later on. After conquering Stormveil, we progress out of the last standing corner of the familiar world and into Liurnia of the Lakes, a waterlogged valley and home of the Raya Lucaria Academy. The entirety of the area seems to be sinking into water, though I can't really tell you why. It makes me think somewhat of the state of creation in Genesis 1, with darkness and deep waters covering the earth, or the global flood. This doesn't really fit, but the theme of water and depth fits all around the story of the area, of Raya Lucaria and of Renala and Rani. Raya Lucaria and its correlatives are studiers of sorcery and thereby developers of intelligence. There is no better time than this to address the separations of the trees of faith and intelligence in most of FromSoftware's flagships. This is typical of fantasy RPGs of all kinds, like Dungeons & Dragons. It's not a statement that faith and intelligence are different attributes, but is rather a categorization of two types of skills. Something like the differentiation of the natural and the supernatural in our real world. Intelligence is the practice of sorcery and the casting of spells. It explores natural arts, not strictly anti-supernatural, but that draws its power from natural ideas, like the elements, often. It's based
Sorry, I was muted. So, comparing sorcery to natural arts is very interesting to me because that does seem to make a lot of sense, because a lot of the fundamentals of sorcery seem to be practiced through observation and understanding of like the cause and effect of the world as they do their supernatural forces. So even though it appears supernatural to us, he might be correct here in implying that it's merely a natural force of the Elden Ring universe. So, operator, welcome on in. Yeah, doing some theological comparisons for now. And then you guys are talking about how not all serpents were evil in the Bible, which is pretty cool. And then Dodd Morros, nice to see you again.
Basis is on our own real-world ideas of witchcraft, astrology, and the things that we might call
Witchcraft.
New Age practices now. Faith, on the other hand, focuses on belief in supernatural powers, which results in the ability to perform miracles or incantations. It may result in similar outcomes to the practice of sorcery, but draws on a totally different source. I've always enjoyed the inclusion of these types of concepts in fantasy because they pull so strongly on dramatized versions of very real ancient concepts. Of course, this bleeds into our Judeo-Christian discussion, but we see in the Old Testament the use of many of what might be called pagan practices, but still showcase power, versus the miracles of the truly faithful. The Jewish person or the Christian would believe that this is evil power, whereas in our FromSoft setting, neither seems to be necessarily preferable from the other. In fact, in most of the games, but looking at Elden Ring specifically, players are encouraged to use a mixture of both intelligence and faith to access many skills and abilities in the game world.
Yeah, I'm glad he's starting to get into that, and I was wondering if he was going to eventually bring up that in many ways the dichotomy between faith and intelligence or sorcery or whatever you want to call it tends to be a bit arbitrary based on like the individual's frame of mind, and that is kind of finally established kind of again in Elden Ring, with Metter's staff able to utilize both incantations and sorcery as a catalyst. And yes, this video is made or released one day before the DLC released, so yeah.
This in mind, Liurnia of the Lakes is a land of the school of the intelligence. Above the sunken civilization, floating in the sky, is the grand Hogwarts of Raya Lucaria Academy. Raya Lucaria and Liurnia are or were the domain of a family of witches, headed by Renala the Full Moon Queen. This is a very common archetype, the association of a woman associated with night and moonlight and the space. On one note, it ties together the idea of the practices of intelligent magic being associated with astrology, space, and moon and such. And on another, it calls to mind the concept of the Queen of Heaven in the Old Testament. This god or goddess is identified primarily as Ashtoreth, a culmination of a goddess of Babylonian and Sumerian beliefs and deities of other ancient people.
That is tragic. There is no red on that health bar at all.
Overall, it's an association of the feminine chaos with the night, intelligence in opposition to day. And even in the spells and incantations in the game, the intelligence spells are usually more derivative of space and star and moon and water and night, while faith represents more so the ideas of day, fire, lightning, and sun. Renala will be lightly mentioned probably in the discussion of Radagon later on. For now, the player does find, upon a defeat of Renala, that she is no longer the powerful queen she once was, and is instead a projection or something of the sort cast by Ranni the Witch, the daughter of Renala. If the player ventures through Carrion Manor, they can meet with Ranni and follow her quest. She ties into the same archetype, obviously, though playing a much bigger role in the story of Elden Ring at large. To say again, Elden Ring is obviously not a typical picture of right and wrong, so the archetypes of what is good and what is evil is pretty unclear. But Ranni's ending results in the extermination of the Golden Order and grace of the Greater Will, replacing it with the Age of Stars and the Dark Moon, which would be a victory of night over day, a victory of chaos over order, a victory of feminine over masculine. Typically, but not necessarily any of these things in Elden Ring's context.
Comparing it to night over day is an interesting parallel because that could just show that it is a full cycle revolving once day turns to night, and then eventually Ranni's epoch should come to an end as well.
But Ranni's entire quest, which is a progression of derailing the intended plot with her own devices, gives mind to the concept which this female archetype represents, the woman of night who interferes with established order to conspire and bring chaos to bear. The idea of the Dark Moon in the Age of Stars and Darkness also seems to be similar to the ideas of the Abyss and the primordial chaos of the darkness over the face of the deep, which sinking Liurnia also represents, as I mentioned. Before passing directly into the next and primary area of the game, the Altus Plateau, there is some other ground to cover. Some underground. The two first beautiful underground river valleys are the sort of an inverse of the typical idea of an underworld. Some later underground areas will be more typical. When riding the elevator down for the first time and seeing just how low it was going, I was initially reminded of the idea of Agartha, sort of a secret underground civilization that is more beautiful and abundant than the above ground, kind of like Journey to the Center of the Earth.
And I was immediately reminded of Blackreach from... It was just Skyrim, wasn't it, that had Blackreach? But anyway, and kind of like, how Skyrim copped a lot of those ideas off of like Tolkien, and how it's just been a pretty standard trope in fantasy for quite a long time, but just the visuals definitely reminded me of it at first. Feminine over masculine. Mariko is the previous god, so you're not sure how that works. I guess I would need to rethink that. And then Stella says, Queen of Heaven was a title of a few Middle Eastern goddesses and got carried all the way through to being used for Mary eventually. Understandable, right? Yeah. Right next to Venice says, faith makes more sense to them as a conviction in something, whether it's the Golden Order, Ranni's dark path, or full nihilism. Intelligence is more science. The marionettes are just ergo from Lies of P. So about that, I would also say that intelligence is a form of conviction in faith in a more instantiable form. So I don't know how well that comparison tracks onto it as a dichotomy, but going back to the whole thing where the dichotomy is a bit of an illusion after all might make it relevant here as well. So Dylan says, do both Ranni and Mikula say their age will last 1,000 years? Kind of interesting. They're both that specific about 1,000 years, if so. So the thing about that is kind of, but mostly no. So let's check out the Mikula dialogue. Your voyage. Whoopsies. So when he says it, he says Sennen no Tabi, which is like literally 1,000 years, or a voyage of 1,000 years. But this is kind of just an expression to just mean like an age. So it doesn't have to literally be a representation of 1,000 years. So this is one of the times where I would say that I don't think the localization goes far enough, and this is probably too literal of a localization. But it's the same thing with Ranni's. So at least for the DLC, I'm totally fine with them sticking with 1,000-year voyage to just set up Mikola as maybe not like a foil to Rani, but perhaps like a reflection of her path to becoming a new deity. All right, let's go back to the video.
The whole area of the First River Valley has a very Native American-esque vibe to it. Spiritual-type beings who are one with nature in almost a forest under an underground night sky, all the way to the ancestral spirit of the great deer creature. This is also related to the game's Norse mythology, though, which has comparable concepts. It's not especially mainstream, but ancient Jewish supernatural theology also held similar ideas. The concept of Sheol and other ancient Judaic concepts of the underworld and the realm of the dead were often regarded as being literally inside the earth, comparable to the Agarthan idea. The mountain of Hermon, which is the location of the New Testament known as Caesarea Philippi, is often considered the location from which the forces of the under-earth came into the overworld. From a Christian theological perspective, it's not really knowable whether this is literal or more spiritual in nature.
Right. I'm glad that he brought that up because I was about to pause the video and bring that up as well, that typically now in English, when we hear the word underworld, it's kind of meant in the sense of an allegory for the afterlife, but it doesn't always have to be, which is, part of the difficulty and fun of trying to make some of these parallels at times.
This plays in more so as we continue through the subterranean worlds of Elden Ring. We'll address the remainder of the underground sections before getting back into Caelid. After completing the underground forest areas, they trail into the underground night cities of Nokron and Nokstella. The night and moon symbology ties directly back to Rani and Renala and the school. The fact that it is underground and hidden in nature seems also to tie into the underworld concepts. More interestingly is the procession from here to Deeproot Depths and the Lake of Rot. FromSoft uses the concept of underground trees and roots quite heavily in other properties like Dark Souls as well. Trees are symbols of life and interconnectedness, and they perpetuate symbolism in religious, mythological, and narrative traditions. The Erdtree is the symbol of life and good fundamentally in Elden Ring, even with the genre subversions. If we assume that the deep roots to be the roots of the Erdtree, or at least the minor Erdtrees themselves, this is interesting. It seems to point to the most central thing having a foot in both the good and the bad, the overworld and the underworld. Life, centrally, is part of each thing. The good has its antithesis in the bad. The Lake of Rot is finally the most stereotypical, if you will, of the underground areas. It is most similar to the traditional idea of hell, though somewhat subverting the more common FromSoft underworld of fire and brimstone. The rot is more bright and red, and rot is a common theme in the game we can begin to address now. Because the game uses so much natural symbology, such as the beautiful natural landscapes, the trees, the forests, and the rivers, the enemy of these things is rot. The idea of nature falling into a state of decay, it makes me think of the concept of sin entering the paradisal garden in Judeo-Christian tradition. The results are the unfortunate rotting away of the good and the natural, a smearing of what was intended as it falls away into shambles. It is more evident in Caelid, whereas the Lake of Rot is more directly a deep, dark, and hellish undergroundscape.
So about that parallel specifically, I don't know how I feel about that, because if Rot was kind of localized there and was made to be a more kind of recent development in response to... Well, actually, I don't know what he's calling, what he's comparing Eden to, because he didn't necessarily do that with Limgrave. But anyway, the idea of rot pertaining to sin kind of ties it to the genesis of... How do I... It's kind of difficult articulating this. Yeah, I guess I just don't know enough about what he thinks he would parallel Marika's journey to, or maybe I didn't absorb it fully. This is hell, okay. The Lake of Rots. Yeah, Sheol is a place for the dead, not literally a grave. I've also heard, and I might be confusing it with like Gehenna or something like that Sheol could have been kind of like the equivalent of a gutter where trash was collected and people may have thrown bodies there as well, like abandoned infants and whatnot, and that could have like colored its associations in like early Judaism and whatnot. But right. So anyway, I don't think Rot maps super well onto Sin because it is such an ancient thing and it does relate to an outer god and potentially predates America's reign and everything. So I guess a lot of my issues are contingent on what he maps to everything else. Gehenna? Okay, Gehenna was the trash heap. Okay, thank you, Corn. And so Sheol is just like the grave thing then?
The Lake of Rot finalizes in the contact with Estelle, the most unique, probably, of the bosses in the game. It really cements the cosmic and alien idea in Elden Ring. It suggests the ending, wherein the deific origins in the game are actually cosmic. Space is often associated with...
Alright, I'm going to need to back that up just to get his train of thought here. Okay.
Tradition. The results are the unfortunate rotting away of the good and the natural, a smearing of what was intended as it falls away into shambles. It is more...
Right, and so the way that he just said that there, I think that makes rot sound like a more recent phenomenon than something that is a lot more ancient, depending on the interpretations of everything like pertaining to America and Jehovah and whatnot.
More evident in Caelid, whereas the Lake of Rot is more directly a deep, dark, and hellish undergroundscape. The Lake of Rot finalizes in the contact with Estelle, the most unique, probably, of the bosses in the game. It really cements the cosmic and
a little bit ironic because there's two Estelles that we can fight.
Alien idea in Elden Ring. It suggests the ending, wherein the deific origins in the game are actually cosmic. Space is often associated with gods and deities, but the idea used in Elden Ring is largely Lovecraftian, which is a big inspiration to FromSoft. The Lovecraftian concept is the ultimate subversion of faith in Christian God. Rather than God or deities simply not existing, it is that they do exist, but care not for the people of Earth, if they even acknowledge them whatsoever. The Estelles reflect these cosmic entities that have seemingly crashed or in some way come to the land between, but it's not clear immediately what they have to do with the story. Back up on the surface world, we can head to the Caelid Wilds. This area was my favorite of the early game, as being teleported here after being in the Limgrave landscape is such a shock. Caelid is really the ultimate showcase of the rot concept. It is so infected by the creatures and people that have transformed into monsters, and the deity that rules over the region is a shell of the powerful god that he once was. Radon is regarded as one of the most powerful of the demigods, and to see him reduced to his condition in the game is very indicative of the power of the rot. In the Christian sense, the hellish and the sinful pollute the world, and tear down the beautiful and the good, and replace it with disgusting perversions and abominations, and leave the landscape stained, scarlet.
So I'm a little bit confused because he kind of acknowledges that Estelle would be a perversion on Christian beliefs and would be more akin to like the Lovecraftian deific type of god creator deity. And so if he thinks that is a parallel, then shouldn't that also recolor the lens through which he's looking at everything else here? I don't necessarily think he has to, but I don't know. I think perhaps the video would be better served that way, or hold on. Man, how do I explain it? Well, I don't think that these parallels are necessarily bad at times. I feel like he may have just shot himself in the foot with like the Lovecraft thing, or perhaps he's using too much of a Judeo-Christian lens right now, and it feels like a little bit of a disservice to the other types of archetypes that are within the game. And that this should have been a bit more of a disambiguated video from Christianity specifically, if he's going that far into like saying something is a subversion of the idea. But maybe not. Maybe it's all fine after all, but that's just kind of my initial read on the subject. If you think that the Bible paints other gods as demons, it can still work. It's not that so much as it is that I don't know how to explain it. I'll just leave that alone for now.
Red. FromSoft is really so impressively diverse in the ways in which they can depict bad and evil. The concepts of greed and corruption, of rot opposed to nature, darkness opposed to light, solar and lunar, they completely encompass every side of as many coins as they can manage. Caelid is a strong example of this, as it is both similar to the prior iterations of the Poison Swamp areas, but also a completely different innovation. It feels unlike any other area in a fantasy or fiction series that I can collect off the top of my head. With all the lower regions complete, we can now ascend to Leyndell, the capital of the Lands Between. The beautiful fall aesthetic of the Altus Plateau is also very unique for From Software, and it's very distinctive. The plateau is sided by the Volcano Mountain on one side and the gilded capital city on the other. We can address the Volcano Manor first. As an aside, the Volcano Manor is the most video game-esque locale, with the extreme Nintendo lava and big-headed enemies. But the area itself is less important aside.
I could see what he means about that archetype. I definitely did kind of get Bowser's Castle vibes going into the what's it called, like the prison district in Volcano Manor or whatever it is.
Aside from its fiery and hellish suggestions than Rykard himself. The Praetor has, in search of power, fed himself to an ancient serpent that he may live forever. This we somewhat discussed before, with Godric sacrificing his arm to the dragon. In this situation, Rykard has literally allowed himself to be consumed by the ancient creature in exchange for power and the foundation of some perverted family, perhaps like selling one's soul to the serpentine devil. The serpent is considered ancient and eternal, called the god-devouring serpent after it consumes Rykard. This is like the intention of the dragon in Revelation, the ancient dragon whom John identifies as Satan, who pursues the child of the Virgin to devour them. Perhaps there is some relation to the serpent who is devouring the offspring of America. Soaring across to Leyndell, we can encounter the picturesque Golden City. It is especially interesting that this false heaven has fallen into disrepair, the absence of its governing council of gods, with only one loyal son remaining. The city and streets of gold in itself reminiscent of allusions to biblical heaven, though this is far from a distinct concept. This is the birthplace of the gods, if you will, the heavens of the angels, at the base of the tree as in the Tree of Life. The city currently is merely a shade of its former self. This is self-evident in the shade of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, who's not really there, but whose spirit or shade remains to guard his last standing child, and
Godfrey the first elephant. It's my new headcanon.
The faux magic of the fallen city of gold. Perhaps my favorite cinematic in this game is after the approach to the Grand Throne Room beneath the Great Tree to find the thrones deserted, and only Margit the Fell Omen in its path again. Only it isn't Margit, it's Morgott, the son of Godfrey himself, grandson rather, one of the twin omens, and Margit was only a combative shade of himself.
Wait, why does he say grandson?
I find Morgott to be perhaps the most interesting demigod in the game, personally. He was rejected among his brethren, he and his brother Mohg. They were each born omens, lepers, if you recall, sick indicators of the rotting society that were shunned. Yet each of them has a choice, to remain faithful to the Erdtree in spite of their circumstance. Morgott is the good son, in this sense, and he does just that, guards the thrones when none of his other siblings can be bothered.
Alright, so what did he just say? That Morgott and Mohg are symbols of the rotting order? I think if he's serious about that, he could have set that up a bit better, because for all intents and purposes, Morgott and Mohg should be more affiliated with a version of the order that came prior to the current one, with them being more tied to Godfrey than Radagon and whatnot. So I digress.
When we get to Mohg, this analogy will be more clear, but I feel that the twin omens are, while a classic brother story, representative of the spirit of Michael and Satan. the two top angels of God. They find out that they will be serving man, and one of them accepts that, and the other rejects, and leads the rebellion against him. Mohg is clearly Elden Ring's satanic figure, and we'll resume this story later on when we reach him. Finally, because we've...
And it is kind of interesting that he keeps on insisting that Mohg is the satanic figure. Obviously, we have the benefit of hindsight, but he had just mentioned Rykard a moment ago, and like his blasphemy literally being devoured by the serpent. And of course, like there are arguments to say whether or not Lucifer was meant to be like the biblical serpent and whatnot, but yeah, anyway, I digress. And Eric, welcome on in to the stream. You were thinking of Cain and Abel. I could definitely see that with Morgott, especially, well, I guess he doesn't necessarily map super well on, because I mean, I was going to say, even if there isn't a super well-known fratricide that we can think of, maybe Cain isn't the best gatekeeper. But anyway, Mohg just has that dignified Lucifer vibe. Yeah, this is, I think, one of the classic cases of subverted Disneyification, where because somebody appears evil, they must kind of be evil. And to be fair, in the base game, there are definitely plenty of reasons to think that Mohg is evil. So I definitely don't blame what was it, Clearwater Questions? Credence Questions. Clearwater, because of Credence Clearwater. Okay, Credence Questions.
We've established that Elden Ring is...
Hold on, whoops. So yeah, I definitely don't blame him for painting Mohg in that light pre-DLC. So what else is it going to say? Besides the Lucifer vibe. Oh, yeah. So From does like to play on people and their Disney-based morality, where like the prettier a person is, the more morally righteous or just they are, which I think ties a lot into Bloodborne, with Ariana the whore kind of being that universe's more holy being than the literal nun that can accompany you. And also the chapel dweller seems like the most evil dude ever based on appearances alone. Maybe a little bit behind Mohg, don't get me wrong, but he's actually a really nice guy. So yeah, glad they made Mikola not so kindly. You mean Kinder? So if only the rest of the community felt that way. And then Stout says Satan and Lucifer were two totally different characters in the Bible. Perhaps that's what he's trying to refer to as Rykard versus Mohg. Okay, so I see what you mean there. Yeah, I guess this would also help if he defined what lens he's looking at Judeo-Christian themes from. Because at times it's more leaning toward the Judeo side, which is perfectly fine, and then others are like more modern Christian, although Corn's probably breaking his own neck, rolling his eyes at me saying stuff like that. And then Corn is just saying he didn't know Mesmer was coming. Yeah. Well, I still don't even think Mesmer maps super well onto that idea, but nonetheless. In the book of Job, Satan was God's prosecuting attorney who would go to and fro across the earth testing humanity. Yeah, I was going to say he was like the, not inquisitor, the questioner. A prosecuting attorney is a good way to phrase that, I suppose. As to like whether or not he was actually Lucifer who tempted Jesus in the desert, or if he's just like an agent of God used to Socratically question Jesus into like coming onto the proper path and whatnot. So yeah, Rykard would actually be a great fit for Satan then as the Praetor. Well, that also depends on if you think Satan as an entity is anti-Christ or not, and that can also vary, I think, based off like certain parables and whatnot. Eric said Mohg would be Cain with the building of his own realm. That'd be the word you use. And Morgott being able, wanting to keep things the same if you take out the fratricide. Actually, no, I think the fratricide might still work in this comparison if you think Mohg taking Mikola out of the cocoon could count for fratricide. Just, of course, maybe he didn't fratricide the biblical equivalent of Abel in this parable. Or parallel.
We'll resume this story later on when we reach him. Finally, because we've established that Elden Ring is a twisting on archetypal stories, we know that the Erdtree isn't really good, and therefore that doesn't make Morgott good, and Mohg bad, as in the angelic parallel story, but rather they are both part of a corrupted machine. The path to the Tree of Life is obstructed by the magic of the powers that be, leaving us with only one choice to become Elden Lord: burn it all down. So we are encouraged to venture to the lands of the giants, who guard a powerful flaming fire capable of burning even the Tree of Life that is the Golden Erdtree. Though somewhat of a secret route, we are thrust up by ancient methods to a land even higher than the Altus Plateau, the mountaintops of the giants. As one might expect for the highest of mountaintops, it is cold and snow-covered terrain. The heights are the dwellings of these ancient giants. This concept reminds me of the semi-traditional idea as seen in stories like Jack and the Beanstalk, where ascending above the clouds leads one to the land of the giants. The ancient giants, a separate breed in religious concept, is much like the giants of the Old Testament in Judeo-Christian tradition, like old giants that were on the earth in those days but no longer. When we reach the mountaintops in Elden Ring, the giants have all but died, save for one. The fire giants serve the flame of the fell god, which shows them perhaps in service to another extra entity than the greater will, but I admit my knowledge falls short. Another note is that the Nephilim, which are the original giants in the Old Testament, are descended from fallen angels, the both of which are traditionally held to have taught humans the evil arts such as things like fire and war, and this springs to mind when encountering the fire giants of the mountaintops. The battle against the final fire giant is almost like David versus Goliath, when David slays the last or one of the last of an old generation. In Elden Ring, it really is a tragedy that this last monument must be struck down to obtain the means to burn down the Erdtree.
Alright guys, you heard it first. Rock Sling is the canonical spell to use to kill the fire giant. Got it.
The fire will lead us down an irreversible path, so before we do that, we will pay visit to two special areas pertinent to three of the most powerful remaining demigods. One secret path out of the mountaintops leads to the mysterious Halig Tree. The Halig Tree appears to be an attempt to imitate and improve the Erdtree, led by the twin demigods Miquella and Malenia. This is another recurring theme in FromSoft, the attempt to imitate and create that which seems great and true. This, in some essence, is really the intention of humanity itself, trying to imitate what God has created. We can do it our own way, but even better. Perhaps in Elden Ring this cause was truly good and just, and may have been better in the end. We may find out more about Miquella's intentions in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC to assist this point. In its current state, the Halig Tree may be beautiful and may have once been successful, but is no longer. At some point, Miquella was kidnapped and has vanished, and Malenia was weakened by the battle with her brother Radahn. During this battle, Malenia seemingly unleashes the Scarlet Rot upon her brother in the land of Caelid to avoid defeat, turning to the dark forces to achieve victory. A shattered warrior, but still the second best combatant under Radahn in his days of glory, Malenia now guards what's left of her brother's achievement so far as she knows. The second area is more significant to the themes of this video, that being the Mohgwyn Palace in the Schiefer River underground. This is where Mohg, the twin omen, the brother of Morgott, has fled to plot against the Golden Order. In doing so, Mohg becomes the Lord of Blood, his palace and dynasty reflecting thus in his bloodish red coloring. Aside from perhaps the Lake of Rot in Caelid, this area is the most hellish, in another way. As we established, Mohg is the satanic rebellious figure. Though all the gods have rebelled against Marika, Mohg is plotting carefully deep below and out of sight, and making secretive and sly choices to further his goal.
You know what this kind of makes me think of now? It's really cool that certain bosses like Renala and Rykard kind of make their own liminal spaces. And it's a little bit unfortunate that other than like the bleeding blood on the walls in the ancient dynasty mausoleum, we don't really get too much of that liminal space going on with Mohg, which that could have been extremely cool with like the Mother of Truth connections and whatnot. And yeah, now that I think about it, even like the Miquella fight might have been served a bit better with an arena change in phase 2. Maybe not. I guess the question would be like, what would it even change to at that point? A prime Halig Tree? That would be super cool, actually. At first I was thinking like the void vastness of space, but I mean that could work too, but I think like a super glittering Halig Tree would be great. Oh, those weird ass omen twins in the void on the Divine Bridge. I forgot about that. I try to repress that memory. Yeah, that's a thing, isn't it? Zoinks.
His concept of being associated with blood, bloodletting, and the power of fire and blood is particularly interesting imagery. It makes me think of sacrifice and blood offerings, specifically like satanic rituals in this context. The great success of Moog in this context seems to be his capture of his half-brother Mikola. He has captured the pure-of-heart god and seeks to corrupt him for his own purposes, the furthering of his dynasty, rebuilding in his own name.
And for anybody who may have joined in late for the video, this video was produced one day before the DLC released, so rip.
Sacrificing blood to Mikola, he seeks to make him into a full god and serve as his consort. This opens up another interesting point about Mikola, which may be more addressed in the upcoming DLC, which is his eternal youth. Mikola is blessed, or cursed, to the eternal form of a child. The concept of eternal youth is very prominent, and the idea of it being an interesting affliction upon a god is also interesting. This is semi-recurring in FromSoft, such as with Gwendolyn in Dark Souls and with Lothric in Dark Souls 3. Mikola sees his youth as a curse and seeks to undo it, and Moog interrupts that process for his own gain. Moog's palace most reminds me of Pandemonium, the kingdom that Lucifer and the fallen angels build for themselves in hell in Milton's epic Paradise Lost. It is the dynasty established by one fallen who seeks to create a new order in his image. Again, though, since everybody is bad in Elden Ring, Moog is neither good or bad for trying to do it his own way and do his own thing.
I'll admit, I was a little bit not expecting that statement right there.
With visits to knock off heaven and then hell out of the way, we are almost ready to proceed to the flame.
So this is a little bit of an awkward pause. And anyway, Hilko, you've been here for a while, but I wanted to say hello to you because I was distracted by other things. And Eric says the first time we ever see sacrificing in biblical history is to Yahweh himself. That's a good point, isn't it? Well, if he is comparing Moog to Lucifer, I don't know what he really means about that connection. So then what does that make the mother of truth? Has anyone come up with a good explanation for the Omen twin disaster bridge? Maybe. Some people say it's like a memory of them together, or like the kind of darkness that what's the word? That assails them as omens or something like that, but generally, no, not exactly. So which is knockoff heaven? Probably Lanedell, I guess. I don't remember. Whoopsies.
There's one quick detour with large story implications. A return inspection of the Golden City of Lanedell can reveal a symptom of the darkness that truly underlies it. This is quite literally true. A careful adventurer can stumble down the wrong well and find themselves in the sewers, a dark and disgusting maze that is even deeper than it seems at the outlook. At first they are mere sewers, where many things dwell, including the dreaded omens which are cast out below. Working downward drastically through the horrid sewers can bring one low enough to find a subterranean chapel, a place of worship unknown, guarded by a projection or an illusion of Moog himself. Defeating him seems to do little, unless one is diligent enough to discover an additional trick door in the front of the altar of the chapel, which gives way to a secret passage. Down even further leads this passage. Carefully dropping directly down a massive descent is the way forward. In this area are droves of mostly deceased merchant people, like the sparse merchants found above ground. At the very bottom of this pit is a mysterious door which can only be opened upon presenting oneself without full armor. This leads to an encounter with the Three Fingers, the heralds of the Frenzied Flame, some supposedly blasphemous flame in opposition to the Two Fingers and the Greater.
So you guys know how I was saying that I thought it was weird, troublesome, problematic, etc., that we've got that one Rao altar of either darkness or wherever you get the sword from in the DLC in a catacomb, and whether or not the catacombs were built by the Rao civilization, then if that is true, then what does this say about the Lanedell ones? And also, why are these catacombs so vertically stacked? Is this kind of like a divine tower of sorts, but not really? I mean, obviously, I think a lot of this stuff is rule of cool gameplay at first, but it's just kind of fun to think about what if it's not just gameplay. And then Korn says, honestly, George R. R. Martin could have just easily been more influenced by Tolkien's Old Testament mythology, aka the Silmarillion, as true biblical books. Very well said, yeah. Operator so bad at platforming, getting to the door was your Everest. Typically, people climb up Everest, they don't fall down it. Well, I guess many do fall down it, so maybe I stand corrected by myself. Pixie said, finding that door was the most crazy thing in like any game. You hadn't found deeper depths yet. It just kept going. Yeah, so I had discovered the Frenzied Flame prescription by accident because there was something that made me want to go back and like look at the altar, not the altar, but like the roots there. And then, because I've played video games like Halo before, that obviously meant that I just spamming the jump button as I was looking around, and then all of a sudden the altar went down. That's a Dexter's Lab reference, but anyway, I know in 1.0 the altar kind of went down automatically after you killed Moog, but it's really strange that they made it that you had to like go right next to it afterward. So finding the Frenzied Flame prescription was really neat. Omelette du fromage, indeed. That's all you can say. And then Korn said, you heard the theory that maybe the catacomb builders built that one around the stone altar. I would be more in favor of that if there was like an uncovered section of cave that the altar was in, but the fact that it's on like the normal catacomb floor just feels a little bit odd. I do think it's obviously a strong possibility that they could have moved the altar there later, but it's just fun to consider what options are available to us. Dylan wasted time hitting every wall, so you tend to find many things just slowly. So I did not hit the wall in the Frenzy Flame prescription because it was a pacifist zone, and I missed that hidden secret. Although I had already gone to deeper depths by that point. I did the Fia stuff kind of early, I think. You don't know why, but that wall looked like it needed to be hit. I also missed the wall next to the damn painting in that leads to Midra's Manse. So I got debated by the painting and then didn't look around too hard after that.
Greater will. The Frenzied Flame is the embodiment of pure chaos, insanity. When we encounter Shabriri, the one who can lead you to the Frenzied Flame, he exclaims, "May chaos take the world." I'm not going to do an impression. The intention of using the Frenzied Flame as kindling rather than the
that was the perfect time to do an impression.
flame from Elena results in chaos. We can discuss the ending when we get there, but the concept is interesting on its head. Based on some shy lore regarding the merchant peoples, it seems that they worshipped and most likely summoned the Frenzied Flame in the Three Fingers. They have all gone blind or lost their eyes as a result. Even though we know that the Greater Will is no good guy, the Frenzied Flame seems truly destructive, representative as it is of madness, chaos, insanity, and destruction. This is a prime example of one of FromSoft's strong personifications or anthropomorphizations of archetypal concepts. The idea of chaos incarnate, the opposite of order, is present here. The servants of the Greater...
So this is one of those things where I don't know if I would fully agree with that. And obviously, one of my more popular Elden Ring videos is my April Fool's one that says the Frenzied Flame ending is the best ending. But the way that I made that video was kind of through the lens of what I would consider like Frenzied Flame propaganda, where everything that I say is kind of true to an extent, but the lies come through omission, if you want to be more articulate about that. So, with that being said, even though the Frenzied Flame is kind of associated with chaos and obviously frenzy, I tend to think the chaotic part of it comes more from the Shabriri interpretation of things, which may or may not actually map onto the Frenzied Flame itself. And I do think it's quite notable that for the adherents of the Frenzied Flame / Three Fingers, that they actually do get healed by the Frenzied Flame stones or whatever they're called. So I think if you change your frame of mind and truly become insane, then that which is insane to everybody else is not insane to you, and you can kind of willingly be embraced by it and accept your fate. So the chaos side of things, I think, is just Shabriri seeing the flame of frenzy being able to burn the world, and he's in favor of that because he's like the Joker parallel.
Will are called the Golden Order and are indeed orderly in establishment. The Frenzied Flame is simply the opposite, chaos. No order, but just the destruction of all order. It is like the element of the abyss in Dark Souls. The Frenzied Flame is worse in some ways, a more threatening.
Oh, so you were thinking that I was talking about the Midra's Manse paintings themselves? No, I hit all of those because there's no way else to go. I mean the one in the Shadow Keep where you get the when you get the painting thing in the like little aqueduct part. So whoopsies.
The Frenzied Flame is simply the opposite, chaos. No order, but just the destruction of all order. It is like the element of the abyss in Dark Souls. The Frenzied Flame is worse in some ways, a more threatening and latent evil held deep below, born out of revenge and hatred, a death throw of an entire people. Finally, we can resume, moving from the depths of darkness back to the tops of the mountaintops.
I'm surprised they didn't tie that into anything like biblical. Or did I didn't miss it, did I?
I wonder if we can go even higher. When we kindle the flame atop the mountaintops in the primal forge, the Erdtree is indeed set alight, burning. On this action, it is revealed that we need one other thing to defeat the true god Marika. We are teleported through time and space to the unbound city of FromSoft, an ancient city that was at some point ripped from the rest of the lands between seemingly by supernatural storms and cast thereby outside of time. The reason for the city's significance is that it houses a certain beast who, in the service of Queen Marika, stole destined death and hid it away. This is what has led to the lack of death in the lands between, the continual resurrection of the tarnished, and the nature of those who live in death, even the eventual resurrection of the demigods themselves.
Yeah. I don't know if I would agree. So, I definitely wouldn't agree with the idea that the demigods were revived by Destined Death's removal, and we are told in an interview by Miyazaki that the Tarnished are not revived by Destined Death, but instead Grace, which is, okay. I don't really blame him for getting this stuff a little bit off, just because it's not native to the game, which I think is kind of garbage in many ways. So, anyway. Captini, you think you've solved Elden Ring? It's all about the song, The Riddle by Gigi D'Agostino? All parts of the song fit the game? Make the lore video, bro.
Destined Death must be...
And Pigsy wanted the explanation of how Destined Death worked the most in the DLC. Well, you and me both, buddy. And we could both not rip in peace because of Destined Death.
Reenacted to allow for permanence. This is such a consistent concept in FromSoft, but also archetypal as well. In Christianity, death is defeated by Christ and removed from the world in place of eternity. Destined Death is a corruption of this concept, almost like the idea of the mark of Cain, that one may walk the earth forever but never die. This idea is especially prevalent in Dark Souls. A brief aside is warranted in discussion of the ancient dragons, which are a big part of FromSoft, leading up to Dragon Lord Placidusax, who is the Elden Lord of the ancient dragons. The concept again is very similar to the previously discussed ancient serpentine symbolism, crossing both wisdom and evil in display. FromSoft almost always has ancient dragons present in their lore, which is also representative heavily of Eastern mythological culture. All cultures tend towards ancient serpents and sea creatures, as do nearly all religions. The implications are not completely clear, but that's still an interesting depiction. Symbolically, there isn't much else to address in Farum Azula, but the significance of the actions involving death and the beast Malekith should not be understated. It is the epitome of death and ancientness. To some extent, it is the inversion of the descent into hell trope. It is an expansion. Of course, you descend into hell and into the depths of the earth, as is typical in narrative archetype, and as in all From Software games, but you are ascending into ancientness and into that which is above and over as well. Ascending into the storm, visiting with the bestial nature and confronting it in order not to overcome death, but to accept it. Finally, after using either ourselves or the maid,
Yeah, so I think that kind of breakdown right there was pretty good and pretty straightforward. Don't really have too much to comment on it.
in is kindling and retrieving destined death, the Erdtree burns. The lands between are cast in a violent red, and the Erdtree is flaming in this deep red, as though burning and bleeding. The golden streets of the pseudo-heavenly Lanedale city are reduced to ash. Alas, we are returned, to be granted audience once more with the Erdtree, expecting this time to be admitted through the burnt thorns. 2 bumps impede our approach. The first is our former colleague, Sir Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing. We haven't yet discussed Gideon. He is seemingly the head of the Round Table, the group of Tarnished who, alongside us, seek the Elden Ring. He is titled as All-Knowing as a descriptor of his pursuit of secret knowledge, secret arts, of spells and incantations. Gideon's typing reminds me of occult pursuits, the pursuit of power in secret arts and rituals and things. Secondly, it reminds me of the Lovecraftian mispursuit of knowledge. Lovecraft specifically denotes how the secret knowledge can...
How come his retaliation never explodes on this fight? I feel like I've died more to the retaliation spell than almost any other spell by Gideon. It just... Anyway.
Corrupt and hurt the one who bears it. It may not necessarily be that Gideon himself has been corrupted, but when we encounter him here, it is revealed to us that he has chosen to be in the service to Marika and the Golden Order, seeking to stop us from attaining Elden Lordship. In his dying breath, after we demolish the stupid spell-spamming range magic build loser with our Mimic tier, he ironically
just totally justified Salt.
exclaims that he knows a Tarnished could not become Elden Lord. This is interesting because his faith is at very least shaken, as if he feels the need to stop us before we can even be tested by the tree. It also shows the shortness of his knowledge. Gideon is truly the least knowledgeable person to ever wield his title. Throughout the game we can see him being wrong about things, but rarely more so than this instance. A Tarnished has already, as a matter of fact, become an Elden Lord, as the first Tarnished introduced in the opening cutscene does. This is Horaloo, chieftain of the Badlands, and we will find out shortly his fate.
I would disagree with that, and a lot of that is contingent on whether or not you believe Horaloo killed a god which came before, but then certainly that does cast a lot more questions onto the so-called all-knowing stature of Gideon to begin with. So it's no secret on this channel that I am a big Gideon skeptic, where I think he tends to give us at least 80 to 90% of the correct information, but the 10% that he gets wrong, he gets really wrong and can drastically alter people's perceptions of things pertaining to the lore of Elden Ring, like Ronnie's Great Rune.
On the defeat of Gideon, we finally return to the throne room in front of the Erdtree entrance. This time, a hulking figure bearing the full-sized spectral lion on his right shoulder kneels before us, holding the corpse of the slain Morgott. This Viking reveals himself to be Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. This is the first one to become consort to Marika and father of the Golden Lineage, including Godric and Morgott, whom he has just mourned. The first Elden Lord is the image of what Tarnished could achieve. The mantle of victory is displayed in him, so of course he must be defeated to achieve it. Godfrey seems large, in charge, and victorious, but may actually be more of a tragedy than it seems. Once we are beginning to defeat him, he changes his strategy.
Did my man not get all of his flasks of tears? That felt like that heal did not what it should have. Well, maybe that's about normal. He does have a really big bar of health, actually.
Achieve it. Godfrey seems large, in charge, and victorious, but may actually be more of a tragedy than it seems. Once we are beginning to defeat him, he changes his strategizing. He kills his golden lion and abandons the Golden Order and the Elden Lordship even, revealing himself to be Horaloo himself, the strongest of the Tarnished.
So Pixie brings up a great point that Gideon says, "I know in my bones" at the end. Then we pick up his items that say the pursuit of knowledge starts with accepting of one's own ignorance. So he broke that rule, indicating he is wrong. Yeah, that is very well said. I appreciate that.
Godfrey and Horaloo is the picture of what this achievement could mean if we get it. Horaloo, through his strength, defeated all in his path to become the Elden Lord. He fathered a golden lineage, which has now been all but destroyed. He was seemingly replaced by a second Elden Lord, and now we are here to destroy him once again, and seek another replacement of the lordship. It seems a picture of the striving for power which is so futile in its true nature. Obtain the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord. Why? Why perpetuate the Golden Order? Only for the struggle to continue. Of course we are able to overcome Horaloo, no matter how many times he throws us around like a rag doll.
You know what? That reminds me of an icon of something. It's always stuck in my mind, but I guess I never really thought about it too much. I don't remember what item it is. Is it? It's not the Warming Stone. It's like the Ruin Fragment. Damn it. Script Stone. I was originally thinking Shriving Stone, but that's certainly not it. Because that's not even in this game, but there's something like that. Sanctuary Stone, that's what it is. Let me back up to that video.
Futile in its true replacement of the Lord by a second Elden Lord, and now we are here to destroy him once again, and seek another replacement of the lordship. It seems a picture of the striving for power which is so futile in its true nature. Obtain the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord. Why?
So this is my fault, because for some reason I always thought the attack was a line rather than like a big old AoE. So I just thought it looked like the Sanctuary Stone, but apparently not, and I just totally misunderstood that. You'd give a lot to know why the pumpkin heads always drop a Sanctuary Stone? Is that true? I guess so. And they also hate the buzzing of flies. I wonder if they hated the Mother of Truth and stuff. You know, I will admit the pumpkin heads are not something I've thought about in a very, very long time. There is one AoE in one line? Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better. For some reason, I guess this one kind of looked like the lineman to me.
Why perpetuate the Golden Order? Only for the struggle.
Oh, yeah, the axe phase has the line. Okay, that would make sense.
To continue. Of course, we are able to overcome Horaloo, no matter how many times he throws us around like a rag doll. The first Elden Lord defeated, we can approach the Erdtree itself. Inside, we find the Queen Marika, seemingly imprisoned by the Greater Will. She is released, and shockingly, her hair transforms red, and suddenly the second Elden Lord, Radagon, stands before us. A careful use of incantations before this could have identified the secret to us early. Marika and Radagon are one and the same, each of them a god. Seemingly. The nature of Marika and Radagon is really confusing in the game, but represents sort of the complete corruption of the ideal that they once represented.
You know, that's kind of funny, because I did do the law of regression in my game before the Marika Radagon fight, so I guess I just took it for granted that Marika was Radagon in that fight. So I wonder how many people who were playing the game blind felt about that revelation if they only discovered it in the boss arena.
Nothing we thought we knew is really true, and rather we have been purposely deceived. The cross-lines nature of this god is interesting and reminds me of the concept of ancient gods, such as the lasting imagery of Baphomet, which is modernly consistent with satanic imagery. Baphomet is no clear gender, consisting with the features of both genders, merging two sexes, merging humanity and animals, merging nature and man. This creation is something off-putting, something strange, something that we can't understand. Maragon is something unexplainable, able to at once father a lineage with the first Elden Lord, then, as Radagon, father children with Renala, and finally, father children in and of itself. Perhaps there is more to this being than we can understand, and perhaps there are secrets still left uncovered. The approach is clear. Defeat Radagon as we have all the other challengers. So we do, and he falls before us. Surely we have slain the god, and obtained the title of Elden Lord. In fact, we have not. From the abyssal insides of Radagon spreads a mass of galactic stars, and out of it springs a massive hand which grasps the body of Maragon and transforms it into a golden sword. The implication is clear. Marika and Radagon were merely the tool to be wielded by the thing that rises in front of us now. The inside of the great tree is transformed into something resembling the cosmos, and the draconic dinosaur of starry shape looms over us. This is the Elden Beast, the true thing we must slay, the dragon which guards the final treasure. The Elden Beast brings us back to the Lovecraftian and cosmic theme that Elden Ring has well covered. Being the true form behind Marika and Radagon, Elden Beast is the first and only real god in the game, and he is ambiguous. He is a strange and powerful thing, as any Lovecraftian god, and illustrates again the difference between the truth of Christian God versus the deconstruction that is taking place in Elden Ring. The Elden Beast is a speechless being, apparently sent by an even greater force, arriving much like the other cosmological beings in the game. His motives are unclear, either his or the greater wills that sent him. Why set up the Golden Order and control it in the way that it did? The question and its answer are seemingly beyond our understanding.
So this is not a well-formulated thought at all, but I wonder if the Elden Beast can kind of be a stand-in for the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil, but I don't know. And part of the reason why I say that is because if the Elden Ring embodies, like, the principles we should have and whatnot, then that might pertain to, like, the forbidden fruits, maybe. Like I said, this was not a well-formulated thought, so don't take it too seriously by any stretch of the imagination. Captini says a parry build with the dagger is always your first playthrough in these games. That's wild. Maybe the dagger parry is actually alright, but at least the curved sword one is terrible. And then Pixie said, after the DLC, you feel like the God Slain text is for Radagon, not the Beast. And then Eric can't get behind my idea about the tree. Well, part of the reason why I mentioned the tree is because it looks like the Elden Beast also has tree-like roots in its bottom and whatnot. What would I consider the tree of everlasting life? Do you mean like the Erdtree or just in general?
The biggest thing is that this beast is still not beyond the power of our ascended Tarnished, no matter how many times he hits you with rapid golden projectiles. We can overcome this god and ascend to the Elden Throne. As with all Soulsborne games, we can choose from multiple endings. We can choose simply to restart the cycle all over again and become slave to the Golden Order, or create our own, I suppose. We can choose to elevate the Golden Order with the apparently brilliant learning of Goldmask and perfect a version of the Golden Order with even more ordered control. We could choose to end the Golden Order as it stands by cursing the future, preventing fallen souls from returning to the Erdtree, the cursed ending. We can use...
And it is so annoying that the Goldmask ending is merely just an extra yellow version of the base fractured ending. And same thing with Vias and whatnot.
The mark of death to mend the Elden Ring and usher in an age of ash and death, embracing undeath and darkness. We can trust the evil chaos force and plunge the world into chaos by the guidance of the flame from the three fingers, burning everything and becoming an insane Lord of the Ashes, the ultimate destruction of order entirely. Finally, we can embrace the cosmic and dark knowledge that we discussed in the Liurnia chapter, the Age of Stars, Moon, and Cosmos, an age without a lord, becoming the consort of the new goddess Radi. As the running theme, nobody can really call any of these endings good or bad, because the lands between are in such a complex state that there is no clear, correct solution.
Oh yeah, watch me. All 5 of the non-chaos flame endings are bad.
What is true that each of the endings takes influence from the many themes we've discussed in this video. Elden Ring draws a drastic picture of dramatized themes, order and chaos, perpetuity and endings, life and death, omens and signs, light and darkness, fire and ice, blood and ritual, family and power, heights and depths, good and evil, ancient and new, and everything that, well, lands between. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like or commenting. I hope everyone is either hype for or enjoying the Elden Ring DLC by the time this comes out, and I would hope to be able to make a video about that as well. As I mentioned before, I'd also like to do versions of this video that focus on other FromSoft games, especially Dark Souls and Bloodborne, but that might be based on the performance of this video. I'd also love some feedback on the big long video format versus splitting this up into parts and see what people prefer. Anyway, thank you to anyone who is still watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a blessed day.
Thank you, my guy. So yeah, I actually enjoyed that video, and that's not entirely too common for me with like a lot of these allegorical type ones, but he was pretty clear that it wasn't like the inspiration for Elden Ring entirely, you know? So it was a bit more measured, even if we didn't necessarily agree with all of the parallels at times. That's perfectly fine. It got my mind working in a bit of a different direction, which can be a nice change of pace as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give him a like. I've gone ahead and shared it. Don't watch Centered Tarnished last one. Okay. Yeah, I'm probably not, because I have not enjoyed Centered Tarnished's approach to a couple of the videos of his that I've seen, but I would like to give people the benefit of the doubt, but anyway. Lane-Del is a brain. Okay. So Eric is saying there were two trees in Eden, one which was the tree for everlasting life that could be eaten, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil which could not be eaten. So if we want to go that route, I could say that gold or runes in and of themselves could be more akin to what would go on to be like the tree of everlasting life, whereas like the Elden Ring could be a certain form of it which would lead people down into like discovering sin and like doing bad things based off of their newfound morals and the principles they would follow. But like I said, I don't really believe in that idea. I was just like wondering in my little fevery dream watching this. And then Bella, it's nice to see you again. So the question is, do we really have enough time to get into the next video? Barely. Okay. So next, let's. Oh wait. I was gonna make a stupid comment about Moog beating the allegations. Oh yeah, but I was going to say to him at his last point here that I definitely didn't mind the longer video format, so it worked. That is, if he ever watches this review. So anyway, let's go ahead and check out Square Table Gaming's video on Elden Ring lore IMPS.
Sometimes.
Oh damn, that's a lot louder. Alright, as for Jack as a mimic, I actually have a personal problem with that guy, and I will not watch his videos. Sorry.
When exploring the lands between, we come across breathtaking sights. We can look down at the land surrounding Lane-Del from the Erdtree gazing hill, look upon the majesty of Stormveil Castle, and even stand at the foot of the radiant Erdtree itself. However, most of the time we're exploring the land on horseback or diving into catacombs. Once we do end up in these underground areas, we can face some harrowing experiences, such as fighting Crucible Knight Ordovis and one of his knights, doing battle with a cemetery shade, or coming face to face with an ulcerated tree spirit. And then there's these guys, the gang squad themselves, the imps. What are these little creatures that defend the catacombs we explore,
Reskin thralls.
striking from the shadows at every opportunity and ruining our day by swarming when we least expect it? Today, we're going to take a look at the imps and do our best to explain the little lore surrounding them. Welcome to the Elden Lore series, where we walk you through the stories and backgrounds of the characters, groups, and enemies found throughout Elden Ring. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. The team here at Scary Terror Gaming is appreciative of every view. If you end up liking this video,
Scary Terror Gaming. Did this come out on like Halloween or something? October 7th. Close enough. Speaking of which, Halloween's coming up soon, guys. Got any cool costume ideas?
Video, why not subscribe to the channel? Every sub helps us grow the incredible community of lore enthusiasts we've cultivated over our almost 2 years of exploring Elden Ring. You can even join our Discord, where we discuss all kinds of topics related to FromSoft titles, from the lore of Elden Ring to which Soulsborne boss reigns supreme. Whether you subscribe or not, thanks again for spending some time with us. And don't forget to check out the Elden lore playlist, so you can explore almost 100 lore dives. With that said, let's get back to the topic at hand.
Dylan's gonna be an impish demon sort? You don't say, or are you just making a funny?
With that said, let's get back to the topic at hand. The imps are annoying. These creatures reside within catacombs and have a penchant for jumping from where you'd least expect them and overwhelming you before you can react to their assault. They wield forked weapons such as hatchets and greatswords, specifically designed to bleed us dry, giving us precious little time to react to their attacks. These weapons tell us very little about the imps themselves, simply stating they are oddly shaped or peculiar. The gently undulating forked blade is known as an imp's tongue and causes blood loss. Everything about these creatures seems meant to ward us away from ever coming in contact with them, which makes sense, as their only purpose is to defend the catacombs we find them in. This explains the wide variety of heads we can see on the various imps, depicting different horrible visages. All of these imp heads are described as a head covering made from the largely unaltered head of an impish golem, and each holds its own specific stat-boosting power.
Now that I think about it, why are the catacombs guarded as heavily as they are to begin with? Things are either dead or they're protecting the dead from would-be interlopers, which I guess could make enough sense on its own that you might want to preserve the posterity of the dead and not have their remains be stolen or messed with. But what if it's also that the imps or Erdtree burial watchdogs are meant to keep the things within the crypts within them? Oh man, how awesome / messed up would it be if, like, rather than bringing out their dead, they brought out their near dead and threw them into catacombs, and then the watchdogs made sure they didn't leave. I really like that idea, even though we really don't have anything, I think, to fully support that in regard to interfactional combat between imps and like skeletons. But maybe they don't care too much about skeletons because they've already gotten got by the Erdtree or death or whatnot. Stoatboat was a pirate last year for Halloween, but you work this year, so you'll be lazy and be a black cat, saying it's Shadow from Devil May Cry 5. And then Liam will probably, to keep people from stealing corpses or their souls from Erdtree burial. But then I wonder, like, why would they do that other than, like, literal grave robbing? And then Eric said, imps give them gargoyle vibes, being the guards that keep things in and keep things out. That's kind of what I'm wondering.
We have the cat, which holds trace amounts of feline intelligence. The wolf, which holds trace amounts of lupine endurance. The elder, which holds trace amounts of arcane knowledge. The fanged, resembling a fanged demon, which holds trace amounts of bestial strength. The long-tongued, resembling a long-tongued demon, which holds trace amounts of dexterity. And the corpse, resembling the visage of a corpse, which holds trace amounts of lingering faith. Each of these horrible...
So, trying to think about what the lore of each of those heads is meant to represent is kind of fun, but I also feel like it's a little bit fruitless, and with the DLC, there might be more to consider now, especially with seeing the Elder and the other one, the dexterous one, being horned, and whether or not that's supposed to relate to the horn scent or the blood fiends or anything like that.
heads.
And yes, the Monty Python reference was indeed intentional.
offers a boon of some kind and serves a specific purpose, to scare you away from ever plundering the depths of the areas in which these imps reside. These creatures are clearly made from stone, and if we take a look at the watchdog staff, it actually tells us a little about the imps. Large stone staff embedded with glintstone, wielded by Erdtree burial watchdogs who protect catacombs. The watchdogs, battered and broken over their lengthy tenure, rule the catacombs and are even said to command the imps. So it would seem that the imps defend the catacombs under a structure that has the watchdogs on top, acting as their commanders, sending them to the various areas they inhabit to hinder those that would come to plunder these sacred ruins, where the roots of the Erdtree can be found, and those that were worthy were brought for Erdtree burials.
Now that I look at it again, I guess the watchdogs kind of represent a horned lion-like being. I don't know.
With the understanding that the imps are made of stone and are led by other, larger stone constructs, we can say with some certainty that these inorganic creatures did not occur naturally in the lands between, but were brought to life through some kind of magic. It would be easy to assume they have no will of their own, but the fanged imp ashes imply they do have some kind of higher cognition, telling us these spirits are well suited to causing a disturbance, moving nimbly like pests and hurling magic pots. The two imps seem fond of each other's company.
Alright, so Hilko was asking, does the staff of the 7 circles have any relevance? The Erdtree burial watchdog crozier? I don't necessarily think so. I thought it kind of looked like Midra's pendant type thing, but it doesn't actually look like it after all, which is disappointing, but fine. The thing which really gets me about them is that they have glintstone embedded within them, which is kind of odd because if we tend to associate glintstone with, if not the Carians, the astrologers, then why is it in the Erdtree burial catacombs when the forces of the Erdtree were initially against the Academy of Raya Lucaria? I guess we don't really know why Raya Lucaria opposed them or why they wanted to invade Raya Lucaria beyond just gathering territory for themselves, but perhaps glintstone could have predated that incursion by a significant margin, but then they do use like legitimate glintstone spells, which is just kind of weird to consider. And then you guys were talking about the Rao ruins and how there's a similar pattern on the imp pedestals in the ruins. I'll need to check that out sometime, to be honest, because I don't know what you're talking about. But then I think when I was playing the DLC, you guys were saying that we could use the crystal darts on the Telu type golems in the forges, so that might also be a weird connection between these civilizations. So long story short, I do think the catacombs stand a really good chance of predating the Erdtree, and they may have been appropriated for Erdtree stuff later on, or at least some of them, because we are told that some catacombs are built at the roots of like the Great Tree and whatnot, which I consider even still now to be like the Leyndell gigantic Great Erdtree.
If they were simply mindless automatons, we find it unlikely they would show any kind of camaraderie with each other. An interesting note about the imps is that they can be affected by the crystal darts. These throwable darts turn them against each other, which speaks to the possibility that whoever created the imps actually...
So these ones use lightning orbs. Is this one of the catacombs more affiliated with like Godwin?
actually has some tie to the original creator
Or do they just all have lightning?
of the Crystallians. When we say this, we don't mean that the imps, watchdogs, possibly even the larger golems of the lands between, and the Crystallians were all created by the same person. Rather, that the Crystallians shared the knowledge of creating a form of artificial life through stone with others. The spell Shattering Crystal tells us the Crystallians are inorganic beings, yet they live. They cleave close to the ideals of the primeval current, and as such, they are revered guests of the sorcerers. And Crystal Burst tells us it is a sorcery of the Crystal Cadre, a group of sorcerers who pursued the wisdom of stone.
So despite all that, I'm not sure that I would tie the Crystallians to the golems, but maybe you can make that argument.
Secrets locked in the faint cognition of the Crystallians. If we consider the possibility that the Crystallians shared their knowledge with the Crystal Cadre, then we have a group that could be responsible for the creation of the imps and watchdogs. This idea can be bolstered by looking again at the watchdog's staff, which is embedded with glintstone, and their sword, which tells us, though decorated with the watchman's eye, the pupil was taken by grave robbers and is now hollow.
So yeah, it is true that there were indeed like literal grave robbers, so the fact that there were watchdogs isn't the most outlandish theory by any stretch of the imagination. And on a personal note, screw having to farm for 2 watchdog greatswords. That stuff sucked.
Leaving this sword a mere lump of stone. We believe this pupil was once a piece of glintstone, more proof of the ties between the sorcerers of Ray Lucaria, who made up the Crystal Cadre, the Crystallians, and the Imps. If the sorcerers of the Crystal Cadre facilitated the creation of the Imps, this would mean that the catacombs had no protectors aside from the undead that sometimes roam their halls, until the marriage of Radagon to Queen Renala. It was not until this time that Queen Marika and the Academy of Ray Lucaria set aside their war against each other and became tentative allies under the rule of the Golden Order. Following this line of thinking, we know Radagon had a particular interest in keeping the secrets of the Golden Order hidden from the world, so it makes sense that he would have these imps commissioned by the only sorcerers in the lands between that may have knowledge of artificial constructs. However, there is one loose end to this theory and timeline: the imp statues found across the lands between that lock Everjails and create force fields to keep us out of areas those who sealed them wanted to protect.
And beyond that, obviously now we have the context of the DLC to indicate that the imps and all these types of golems existed elsewhere before Radagon's like official reign, but yeah.
We believe the simple explanation here is that these imp statues simply came first. They were already being utilized across the land as a way to magically seal away threats to the Golden Order and the secrets they wanted hidden. Their design was simply repurposed so they could serve the same function in a different capacity. Thanks to the Crystal Cadre, these imp statues would not only work as magical jailers, but they would be given artificial life so they could defend the secrets of the Golden Order in a more physical and, frankly, annoying fashion.
So I get where they're going with that. That is some kind of plausible conjecture. It is kind of removed from the text, though, and I do wish that this was set up a bit more as conjecture, because if we have depictions of the imps which predate the Golden Order and the watchdogs having glintstone and stuff, it does bring up a lot of questions about the Golden Order's relationship to the catacombs, and like the whole like Rossus figure is another thing that's worth consideration. Although it is a bit strange to me that the Rossus figure does have the ancient Erdtree. No, not it doesn't use the ancient Erdtree. He uses the Erdtree worship sigil when he like lights the way on the shades. And we also have imp shades or watchdog shades. Maybe that's worth consideration as well. And in the fire conquering heroes grave catacomb, whatever it's called, we have trolls and like the fire monks. I'm pretty confident we would have imps in that catacomb, but maybe not. The statue of one imp mounting the other looks kind of crazy at a second glance. So another thing to consider, and I do agree with them that the imp statues may have like predated the imps themselves, is that we have the imbued sword key depictions of imps by the 4 belfries, which also connect into Fair Missoula. So the imp type stuff should be pretty ancient, all things considered. So I do like the idea of potentially using Ray Lucarian Glintstone to give them like identities as watchers, but I don't know how canonical that actually is.
So what did you think of our exploration and theory on the origins of the imps? Do you believe that these stone constructs are somehow becoming more sentient over time? Were they given life by the Crystal Cadre at the behest of Radagon to defend the secrets of the Golden Order? Why were the imps given so many different variations of heads? Do you believe they have a different origin? And if so, what is it? We look forward to reading your thoughts and theories in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore.
They didn't have a spooky outro. Alright, so that's pretty much that for now. I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat for you guys if you want to give Square Table Gaming some support. They do a lot of really self-contained videos like this one and are pretty good for sticking mostly to the materials found in the game. So, Pixie said, Stone Sword Key, Stone Sword, Rao, perhaps. So, yeah, it is really strange that if the catacombs were built by the Rao civilization, then does that mean the Rao people weren't all like super gigantic giants, or was it that a subsect of them were more like person-sized? Maybe that's worth considering as well sometime. But yeah, I do think it's important to draw the distinction that the catacombs did kind of have a change in management once Radagon became Elden Lord, and he also sent down maybe not all of the duelists, but he sent out duelists to also serve as grave wardens, either to keep things in or to keep things out. We don't entirely know, but maybe it was just a change of occupation because they didn't want people dying in pointless duels anymore. But all right. If the Rao built the Divine Towers, they're normal person-sized halls. Are they? I thought their doors were giant. Oh, you mean like in Caelid. So maybe it was a mixed civilization, or maybe they were just all little dudes after all. And maybe if they're all little dudes, then perhaps they aren't particularly related to the like Forbidden Land supergiants or the ones in Caelid. And then Paisan said, what if Rao didn't build the catacombs? They just built the automatons and they were a gift or bought. Which automatons are you talking about? Are you talking about like the imps or like the big golems that like wander around? So I don't really have too much to say beyond that. Let's go ahead and finish this out. All right, so unless Paisan has a response, that'll be it for tonight's stream. So as always, we will be going live again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you think the Rao people could have bought the imps, the watchdogs, or all of them? Maybe, but I guess we also don't have giant bones in the catacombs, so... Anyway, that'll be it for tonight's stream. Hopefully we'll catch you all on the next one. So until then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.